AspenBrainLab, everybody, if you would please come in and take your seats. We're about to get started. I just want to know one more time, does everybody feel good? Well, James Brown is here, and we are going to start this party with a little bit of a dance break because that's how we do it here at the Brain Lab. If you guys would get up, we're going to just do a little dance here. Come on, stand up out of your seats. Thank you so much, Access Circles. Thank you to our Platinum Pass holders. Thank you to everybody who is here tonight. Thank you for standing up and moving and grooving. We are not going to sit here all day and bore you to death. We promise you we are going to have an amazing time and stimulate your brains. Oh yeah, here we go. Anybody has good dance moves? Come on the stage right now. Anybody? All right. Is there anybody famous in the audience that could come up right now? Can you just turn it up a little bit? Louder. Oh yeah. Here we go. Woo! All right, keep it moving, keep it moving. Okay, well, we're fading out now. I'm going to introduce to you the founder of the Aspen Brain Institute and the Aspen Brain Lab. Can I please have Glenda Greenwald come onto the stage? Everybody, let's give her a hand. Woo! She's dancing her way up on the stage. Look at this lady go. Woo! All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Would you all take a seat? We just don't want to get started too late. What a great group. Gina, thanks for the jivey intro. If I could just have all of your attention. I wonder if the Access Circles people are here today. All right, okay. So, I'm Glenda Greenwald, and I want to welcome you to our 6th annual Aspen Brain Lab. I'm really very proud to be presenting our Aspen Brain Lab program today because, as you know, unraveling the mysteries of the brain is now a national and global priority. And here we are in Aspen with our growing community of 21st century global seekers, and we're going to look at a lot of the mysteries of the brain today, but we're going to have a lot of fun too. I want to do several thank yous first, and I want to thank some of our sponsors. One of our great sponsors, who is actually more of a partner, our Access Circles. Are Carol Lee and Lynn here? I just can't see from here. They're not here. So let me thank all of the Access Circle people in any case, because for 6 years now, they have brought 50 to 60 sparkling entrepreneurs and power women to support Aspen Brain Lab every year. And I not only thank them, I laud them for their new initiative of trying to push forward very special research on women's health and talking about gender differences. Up to now, we have not used women to study any kind of pharma and drug research. And we need now to use female mice and females to study women's health. And I think some of the top women in women's health research are with us today. So welcome, all of you. Another sponsor is Alpine Bank. Mary Ryerson, are you here? Yeah. I think you are. Alpine Bank, which has banks all over Colorado, is the most community-minded bank and and one of the most community-minded business folks in Colorado, and they have supported us every year. Thank you, Mary. And then I want to thank a new sponsor, which is Us Against Alzheimer's, and George Vredenberg, who is the founder and president. And you will see him later, or you will hear him later as moderator and speaker on the deep dive against Alzheimer's, into the end of Alzheimer's. Thank you, George, very much. Next, I want to thank the Aspen Brain Institute Board. Can you just raise your hand if you're an Aspen Brain Institute board member? Thank you all for coming. Thank you for supporting and funding all of our 3 major programs, especially AspenBrainLab at the moment. And you will hear more from them as they will be introducing some of our speakers. So thank you for this beautiful board that I'm honored to have. Shanta Heath. Shanta, are you around? Shanta. Shanta's our project director of AspenBrainLab. She does this whole thing. We couldn't do it without her, so please give her a round of applause. I want to thank all the volunteers who are helping us. They have staff written on their shirts, and you can ask them any questions, and please do, because things might get complicated later. I also want to thank the HS Squared kids for coming. They are high school kids from all over the country who are highly STEM talented, STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and math. They're highly STEM talented. They're here for an intensive summer program, and we give them, and to get them into the best colleges in the U.S. Would you all stand up, the HS Squared kids? Woohoo! And then I want to thank all the nonprofit groups who have display tables outside. They're all helping us with our body and mind health. And I want to give, thank you very much. I want to give a special shout out to the Aspen Valley Hospital Head Trauma Unit. They give us free bicycle helmets every year. And now they are free and they are generous to us, but they are for people that really need them. So please go outside, talk to them about concussion, the need for helmets, and please take a helmet if they have one left, but make sure that you really need one. Thanks. Now, my most heartfelt thanks go to the doctors and scientists and presenters that are here with us today, because they've come from near and far, and in this case, from very long. Several of our doctors and presenters had to take the long ride from Denver to get here today, but I think everybody made it, so thank you very much. The presenters here today are really our force multipliers. Now that's a kind of weird phrase, but they are giving us all of their research and their wisdom at the same time. And as I thought about why they're so important to us, I also thought why it's so important that AspenBrainLab convenes such a large group to hear all of our experts. And I found this quote that just explains it, at least for me. If I can find it. Every gain in technology demands minds and brains that are capable of accommodating the change. And the changed minds and brains go out and reshape the world even more. So that's that's their job, and it's all of our job. We're going out to reshape the world even more. Now, just a few notes, and then we'll begin. I want to tell you about our tiny program books. Do any of you see the little program books? So everybody, all the speakers, gave us lengthy bios that were more like memoirs for their grandchildren. So, so we put all the bios online. And you're welcome to look at your electronic devices, but please keep the ringer off. We'll have a healthy breakfast brain break at 10:30. You can look forward to that. We'll be trying to feed 250 people in about a half hour. You're welcome to bring your food back here and eat at the tables, but just be mindful of the time when that happens. And now we can get started. I have a real quick intro for the creative brain. We usually separate our talks into creative brain, healthy brain, future brain, and in the afternoon we'll do impaired brain, talking about Alzheimer's. So creativity, there's not an app for that. We're going to start on creative brain. There's an entire science about creative brain called the neurobiology of creativity. It's often a study of dopamine, a brain chemical that's certainly one of the mothers of creative invention. On my inbox or on my phone, I read every day about mind-blowing innovations and inventions. And they're all examples of creative brain in my mind. And so let's look at a few of the examples of creative brain that we have with us here today. Let's start by Laura Welch, one of our board members, coming to introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Welch, and I'm a board member of Aspen Brain Institute. And I am a mountain climber and fellow adventurer, so making this introduction is exciting for me. I am introducing Scott Carney, who's an investigative journalist and anthropologist, and he's worked in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. His work blends narrative nonfiction with ethnography. Currently is a senior fellow at the Schuster Institute for Investigative Journalism and a 2016 Scripps Fellow at the Center for Environmental Journalism in Boulder. His books include the New York Times bestseller, What Doesn't Kill You, as well as The Red Market and The Enlightenment Trap. Carney was a contributing editor at Wired, and his writings have also appeared in Mother Jones, Men's Journal, Playboy, with his shirt off, just to name a few. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce James Carney, or Scott Carney, sorry.
Thank you. Hi there. Thanks so much for having me here. Again, I'm Scott Carney, investigative journalist, and I think I want to start with a little video about what this project has entailed, the book called What Doesn't Kill Us. So could we just run that first?
I traveled to Poland to expose a charlatan, a prophet who claimed he could give ordinary people superpowers. He said he could control his body temperature at will, hijack his immune system, and conquer the world's tallest mountains with no cold weather gear. I'd built my career as an investigative journalist debunking people like him. But to prove he was a liar or a madman, I had to try his method. I'm not an athlete, I'm not exceptional, but I found a power that I never knew humans had. I hiked to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro without a shirt. I sat on the snowy bank of a river until the ice melted around me. I trained with top athletes. I crossed the finish line of the world's most notorious cold weather obstacle course race wearing nothing but shorts and a smile. I could do 80 push-ups on a single breath, and I lost 7 pounds of fat in 7 days. If I can do it, anyone can.
So sometimes people need video and photos to understand exactly what I'm talking about, because a lot of it sounds frankly unbelievable. And back in 2011, when I heard about this guy named Wim Hof sitting on an iceberg somewhere north of the Arctic Circle, I had been an investigative journalist for about 10 years. My first book was about organ trafficking. My second book was about how meditation and intensive spiritual pursuits can kill you or drive you mad. And I'd been following these charlatan gurus around the world and just finding time and time again, people who are promising you superpowers are liars and charlatans, and they're out there after your money. So when I heard about this guy, he said that you could sit on an iceberg and control your body temperature. He said that you could control your immune system with the power of your mind. And I was like, bullshit. Like, there's no way. And so I got a commission from Playboy, and I flew out there with the intention of debunking this guy, to say, look, you're, promising something which is just too big, and it's pretty likely you're going to get people killed, because who can do that, right? So I flew to Poland, and I had been living in Los Angeles right before this, and before that I'd been living in India. So I am a warm weather guy. I like palm trees, I like beaches, and I hate that stuff that he's sitting on. And so got off at Poland, in a city called Wrocław, and he meets me at the airport gate. And he's this sort of shortish, ruddy-looking guy with a big bulbous nose and a little pointy hat that makes him look like a garden gnome. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be the easiest assignment of my life. And he greets me with this, big smile, open-hearted, and he says, I'm so glad you're here. And he's like, and I know you're going to try to, ruin me. and at this point, Wim Hof is a nobody, right? It's 2011, January, and he's running this big training program that he was sure was going to fill up, and it was me and two other guys, one guy from Latvia, one guy from Croatia, and they were very excited about him, and I was like, this guy's crazy. So we drive out into the mountains, and we get to this tiny, dilapidated farmhouse in the mountains, and the first thing I see is this dude standing in a snowbank, throwing snow on himself, and there's steam coming off of him. And I'm like, one, that's crazy, and I don't want to do that. And two, how is that possible? Steam? What's going on here? And I sit with Wim that night. And so there's this thing that anthropologists and journalists struggle with, which is if you're going to go report on something, if you're going to go out there and try to understand something, you can do it as an observer and sit on the outside and try to be clinical about it and say, these people are doing this method and it seems very interesting. Or you can jump in. And I'm the sort of guy who jumps in. And even though I think that he's probably a charlatan trying to take advantage of people, I'm still going to give him a fair shot. That's just sort of the rules that I abide by. So the next morning, after hanging out with him for an evening, we start the training process. And we'll get into the training a little bit later, exactly what it entails. But one of the things you do is stand out in the snow. And he's like, it's going to hurt when you stand in the snow. And I'm like, great, that's terrible, because cold is especially bad for me, right? All of you are thinking the same thing. Everyone in this room is thinking, cold's really bad for me personally. And I stood in the snow, first time ever, and I stand in it, and my feet hurt. It feels like I'm walking on coals, because my feet, for the very first time, have felt an environmental experience that they'd never felt before, called vasoconstriction. But his method over the next week does pretty miraculous things. It's really straightforward. There's two things that you do. One is you learn is his breathing method, which is essentially hyperventilation, followed by an exhale, and you hold it. You do that 3 or 4 times. And you hold it first time a minute, second time maybe 2 minutes, maybe the third time you're holding it for 3 minutes. Maybe you get to 5. Maybe you get to 2, and that's all you can do. That's fine. But you're trying to push that gasp reflex back. And there's metabolic reasons for why this works that you can totally read the book for why it does. But surprisingly, it works. And not only that, after doing 3 or 4 of these times, he says, hey, do push-ups. Exhale fully. You're super oxygenated now. You've blown off all the CO2 out of your system. Exhale and do push-ups. And at this point, I could do 20 push-ups. I knew that. But I did this, and without breathing, with empty lungs, I did 40 push-ups, and they felt easy. So something was going on here that was really weird. The second thing you do is you get in the snow. You get into that stressful response, like this. And instead of clenching up and shivering, you relax. Because you're programming, all of the things in your body are telling you, clench up, fight this response with everything you have. And that's what we call a sympathetic nervous system response. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight response. You see a tiger, that's your sympathetic nervous system. You know, not in the zoo, but like in front of you. Okay, that's your sympathetic nervous system firing. That's your adrenaline going crazy, giving you that boost of speed to get eaten by the tiger a little bit later. And what we're doing here is, in the snow, you trigger that same response. But now you're telling yourself, okay, I'm going to switch this response. I'm going to relax. And your body doesn't want to die, right? Your body doesn't say, okay, I'm going to give up on life right now. It's over. What happens is you've denied it the sympathetic way to heat yourself, which is shivering. And now you're switched over to a metabolic program. You're burning fat, literally, and transforming that into heat energy. And it's amazing. You can learn this in like 15 minutes. You can learn this in your shower, believe it or not. And that's, you know, in a way, that's all there is to it. And you can do some pretty cool things. After 6 months of training, doing this constantly every day, and also doing things like running 3 or 4 miles throughout the winter in Denver, so not extremely cold, but here I am just in shorts, I ended up climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in that outfit. That's Wim next to me. So why does this work? Right? What is it behind this that is working? Remember, I'm the guy who says that meditation will kill you, right? I am not the hippie pranas coming from heaven and filling up my chakras dude. Those guys are fine, but that's not my thing. Why is it that I was able to, in just the course of a week, radically transform my interaction with the environment? Well, it turns out there's evolutionary principles. These are not superpowers. These are human powers. Now, our species has been around for, depending on what archaeologists you talk to, between 200,000 and 400,000 years. Now, in that time, our species, that means Homo sapiens, you guys, dealt with extreme variations in heat and cold. It doesn't matter if you're talking in the Sahara, right? Even in the what we consider a hot environment, you're going up to 110 degrees in the day, and you're dropping down to 50 degrees at night. And they incidentally didn't have central heating back then, right? They incidentally didn't have air conditioning. What they had was their biology to deal with the changing environmental norms. Now, what has happened only in the last 150 years, 100 years, is that we have taken out that constant of variation in our environment and factored it out. We have become creatures of comfort. We have become totally addicted to the fact that we don't want our bodies to do any work. But that is not what we evolved for. And so what looks like it's crazy is actually just something that we have. We are the descendants of evolutionary winners, and all of this is something that you can activate. And really fascinating is that it doesn't take a lot of time to do. Because we're evolutionary winners, it wasn't like our distant ancestors saw a snowstorm on the horizon and was like, okay, I'll get ready next month, it'll be fine, right? What happens is that these changes to your metabolism are survival-based, and you have to enact them quickly, which is why in 1 week I was able to perform those pretty drastic and amazing feats. Now, there's an entire hidden biology in your body. If you have about 60,000 miles of tubing. And along that tubing, and there's a lot of biology that I'm not going to be able to get into because we don't have time, but we're just going to look at one. It's called vasoconstriction. Now, when I jumped in that snow, the first thing I felt was pain. And one of the reasons for that pain is that there's these muscles called smooth muscle on all of your arteries, which constrict in a life-threatening situation like cold, and to shunt blood to your core. This is a basic mammalian response. Your cat has this, probably. But you cannot control vasoconstriction consciously, well, at least not very easily. You need that environmental stimulus to trigger that response. And if you've never done it before, you're not actually using your biology. So what we need to think about here is that all of this, the environmental stimulus that come to you is important for human health. Now, we usually think about human health in two ways, right? It's the food you eat and the way your body expends that energy through running or whatever else, right? This is like every diet plan ever, right? How do you get in shape? You eat the right stuff and you do the right things to optimize the way you work. But there's a third pillar of human health that we are just generally not conscious of, which is the environmental stimulus that's coming to you right now. You're all sitting in an air-conditioned room somewhere in Aspen, right? Outside, it's actually sort of sweltering hot. Why do we come to a totally comfortable room where we can wear really whatever we want on the inside and feel comfortable? That comfort is an addiction that we all have and that we've all grown very accustomed to, that is not in any of the indigenous traditions in the world. So I want you to think about that. If you jump into the cold, I mean, I said I lost 7 pounds of fat in 7 days. My book is not a diet book, okay? But it could be. Go tell Oprah. Actually, some of you guys might know Oprah, so please do tell Oprah. So the underground, the main concept in this book isn't just about cold and heat and breathing, right? The real concept here is the environment, and it's a concept that I call the wedge. And this is when we use an environmental stimulus to trigger a predictable reaction in our environment, and then using your intentions, so before you get into that environment, to redirect that response to either a parasympathetic or sympathetic pathway. Now, I know that's a big mouthful of words that I just threw at you, but let me break it down. Let's say you have to sneeze, okay? We can all know what sneezing feels like, right? It's this, and it's sort of like it's painful, it's sort of fun when it actually happens, right? But we know that process. Now, if you say to yourself, I don't want to sneeze, I'm going to stop sneezing right now. You can go like this. You can go, and you can let it go. And that is the essence of the wedge. It's using that response that comes in and then stopping it from happening. Now, this gives you some control over this system in your body that you actually shouldn't have control over. The autonomic nervous system should not be hackable in that way, but it is. And it works not just with a sneeze, because honestly, there's no reason to control sneezing. It's fun, right? But it is something that you can intervene with. And it also works in cold, it works in heat, it works in anything where you have a sensation that comes in from the environment. It could work with delaying an orgasm. You could do it that way. It could work with, with sleep. And we're going to have some yoga nidra talks a little bit later today. Now, the way I look at it, the wedge breaks in two different ways. And Jamie Wheel is going to be talking about flow a little bit later, so that's really, we're going to dive down into that a lot deeper. Now, the wedge is this concept, is where you have this autonomic response and you can choose how to deal with it. And when you jump into a cold shower, let's say, your instinct is to go, and that's grit. That's power, that's force. That is what Americans are really good at. We really love grit. We love that tough guy thing, okay? And you can get some control over your autonomic nervous system when you do this. You're trudging through a desert. Sometimes you need the grit to get through, or else you're going to get killed. But there's this other side, too, where you also have control over your nervous systems, where you relax and you say, instead of fighting that stimulus that's coming from the outside world, I can go with it. I can use it. I can say, this thing that I'm experiencing, isn't pain. This thing I'm experiencing is joy. This is fun. And there's this mental switch. And when I ran that cold weather obstacle course race and when other people were in wetsuits and neoprene and out there for hours and hours of time on the field, I was in a bathing suit and I was saying, oh my God, that pain on my skin, that's the sensation of joy. And that transformed for me into the actual metabolic change of heat. And I was also really happy. So, how does this work? Now I'm going to get into, I only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a very quick primer on how you get information into your system. When I'm feeling cold, that sensation enters my body as volume. It's like this sensation that comes in, but my brain hasn't yet processed it. And it comes in to the lowest areas of the brainstem simply as like sensation, but it doesn't mean anything. And then what happens is that sensation goes from the paralimbic system, where it's just sensation, to the limbic system, where we combine that with an emotional response, where that cold now becomes, pain, oftentimes. And where it makes that symbol, where it defines that happening, is when it creates that symbol out of your emotional state at the time that you are feeling this thing. And the next time you feel that same sensation, your body doesn't reinterpret that stimulus. What it does is it goes back to the symbol that you've created neurologically in your mind and reacts to that because it's sort of lazy. It doesn't want to create the new information. And so with the wedge, what you do is you tell yourself intentionally, right now as I'm entering into this stressful stimulus, I will reinterpret that stimulus in my new emotional state. I will give it a different emotional valence, which gives you amazing resilience. And now this will not make you Superman. You're not going to be able to, you can hike up to the top of Kilimanjaro in a bathing suit, but you cannot be ejected into space. So take that in mind. In the battle of nature versus man, nature always wins. There's a lot more to talk about in this. This also radically changes your immune system. And we don't have time to get into it. But what has happened with the people who are following this method, because they're more environmentally sound, they're also seeing remission in things like Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis. They're managing Parkinson's. And it's truly amazing. I suggest you check out the book. There's a really cool shirtless dude on the front. It's not me. And the other thing you can start doing right now is taking cold showers. Take a cold shower in the morning and relax in it. This is your introduction to your nervous system. And learn from those sensations and interpret that as joy and happiness. If you want to learn anything more, my name's Scott Carney, scottcarney.com, SG Carney everywhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Hello. Hi, guys. After reading Scott's book and hearing and thinking all about the cold thing, I got as far as when I have my hair washed at the beauty shop and they say, do you want a cold rinse? I now say yes, but I say, no fear, joy. And it's beautiful, it works. And I've gotten as far as cold showers, like fingers, toes. Anyway, we're all going to try this. And one day, Scott, I really would love you to do a workshop with us and teach us all how to find joy in the ice cold therapy. One year, we had too many videos. And this year, we're only having, I don't count Scott's video because that's part of his presentation. And we're looking in the segment of creative brain. I thought that Wim Hof method and Scott's response to it is really terrific examples of creative brain. But I have a video that I'd like you to watch. It's about a blind man and his armless friend, best friend. And they are disturbed to see the rural paradise where they grew up. It no longer had flowers or trees or fish or clean water. And they were really disturbed about this lifeless area. And they felt they had to do something. I'm not going to tell you their response, but I'd like you to see this inspirational stories of how two very poor Chinese men with severe disabilities, one is blind and one is armless, but they have great creative brains and big hearts. And let's see how they make a difference. Thank you. Please show them.
一棵树就是一台吸尘器。就说真的，你就说现在你看空气质量这么差，每天就是灰蒙蒙的。
小时候吧，周围的环境比现在要好。那时候的水里边的鱼、虾、囊巴都挺多的，山上的鸟类也多，野兔子、干什么都挺多的。所以说植树啊，只有利，没有害。 我叫贾文琪，是河北省石家庄市丁兴县孙庄乡野里村人。我今年54岁。我是3岁时，1965年，营出高压电，跌起了双臂，这从小就是一个残疾人。
我叫贾黑牙，今年55岁。我从2000年这个在一次事故当中把这个双眼给崩瞎了，就是我们两个从2002年开始种树，一直到现在了。我们从小就是发小。 我们的子一辈父一辈吧，我们的老人他们以前就关系挺不错的，就是老邻居。我2000年的时候把眼睛给打瞎了，大夫一告诉我说判死，就等于判死刑了，说眼睛你不会是看见了。 真的那个时候真的想跳楼了，你不是这样，从小叫什么习惯了。你说以前我一看多远，拿起报纸了你就要看了你。这个时候。 就是说，我们怎么干？就说，我拉着他的衣袖，他说：“你对我的双眼，我对你的双手。”每一年差不多有3种这个鸟类灭绝了，就没有了。
工业污染，主要是工业污染，都是石灰厂，这样把这个空气都给污染了。
我为什么把眼睛打瞎呢？以前就是干那个石灰厂，
因为过去这山上吧，它起码有草，有这个山林子什么的。 现在他这样一开发，把这个山体都破坏了。这一刮风，它都灰尘就起来了，全部刮到这河里边，这个浑水把这个鱼鳖 虾什么的都给呛死了，灭种了都。我从小真的我喜欢这个树林。最初我是在残疾人艺术团工作，后来我老父亲有病了，我辞掉了残疾人艺术团工作的职务，回来了。回来我照顾着老父亲。那时候正好他也把牙伤了，正是在这个能干的时候伤掉了，你说苦闷不苦闷呢？哎，那时候我们这两个人都协商着干什么呢？总不能把自己作为这个社会的累赘，就是我们两个人也别的也干不了，人活着还得要奋斗啊。所以说呢，我们两个就想着，哎呀，这植树吧。
我们第一年秋天的时候种了，就是800棵。我们每天数着数，我们说啊，种了几棵了，种了几棵了。第2年春天过了春天以后，看那个树，说真的，对我们打击挺大的，就是只喝了2颗，800棵只喝了2颗。我们以为插上就能成活了，其实可并不是那么简单的事儿，没水它照样活不了。我们也挺灰心的，我说干不了，算了吧，我们干不了。那个时候，人家贾文琪说真的，贾文琪比我这个坚强，人家从小就没有少，就是他叫我不要灰心，我们还继续种，咱们想办法。说这样吧，我们把这水引过来，把这水引过来以后，咱们开始栽种，水到哪里，我们种到哪里。
慢点啊！
好。
哎，慢点，慢点。哎，这么插上，在最初植树的时候，你没有这个树苗的来源怎么办呢？
我头上不起来，因为我没有钱买树，没有钱买树苗，光说种树啊种树，没有钱买树苗，你怎么办？
我们就是这样，看着树枝。
你说咱们可以说全国说起来，哪有说用那个树枝去当树苗的？这也是逼出来的，没办法的办法，把我们逼出，我们试着种吧，试一次。
你可他说不这样，这是好，行吧。
哎，过了好长时间，发芽了，就是长出这枝叶了，哎，可以了，那可以，这是可以活了。哎，后来我们就开始种树了。
这样，这是好，行吧。好，拿着，拿点树枝来。好，你找着啊，我美啊。练了几期，可没俺3天的事，天赋怪的呀。
这发出来成了文物了。
对了。
我们看10几年了，我们2个残疾人10几年种了1万多棵树。
现在我们这个几十亩荒滩已经都成了树林了。以后村委会又批给我们100多亩坡地、山坡地，仍然让我们到山上植树去。别人看看我们2个残疾人能够植树的话，说别人假如说都活动起来，都行动起来，啊，
只有精神团结、互相团结的说，什么事情可以干成了。 假如每一年一个人只成活2棵树或者1棵树，咱们那个前景是什么？那个概念是什么？这是。
虽然我们2个人的能力有限，但是我们可以用我们这种精神。假如说你那着想得到，不看做得到，做得到是不是不看说得到，说得到不看。也就是说，让后人，让世人看到这片树林之后，即便我们2个不在了，别人也知道这是2个残疾人制成的，这一片树林是残疾人给留下来的。
Went out to China to meet them, and this is a GoPro video, and it's kind of gone viral, and I think it's fantastic, a great example of creative brain and generous mind and spirit. Let's go on to one more good creative brain. Karen Anderko, going to introduce Cheryl. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Karen Anderko. I'm a Aspen Brain Institute board member and the Director of Research and Education at Integrated Listening Systems. It's a neuroplastic therapy company. I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker, Cheryl Barteau. She's a public relations executive who's gone back to her farming roots and her lifelong love of horses to create a nonprofit that's helping people with autism and veterans with PTSD. She co-founded the Smiling Goat Ranch in Carbondale to share the horseboy method, which is an equine therapy that's rooted in science and in love. She and her volunteer team of patient and empathetic humans and animals celebrate neurodiversity and the therapeutic benefits of being in nature. Her natural and inclusive sensibility appeals to me, and I know that her work will be compelling as you listen to it. Please welcome Cheryl Barteau.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. One other little piece, part of my introduction, I am an autism mom as well. I'm really excited to be here and share our work with you. I really wish I had one of my horses up here with me, but I think he might break the stage. He's pretty large. And then I thought maybe we could take him out back into the lawn and we could actually do a sensory work demonstration for you. But instead, we're only 25 miles from here. You'll have to come down and visit us and meet our equine team for yourself. As I said, we're located in Carbondale, Colorado, and we implement the horseboy method and the movement method. And it's the only equine therapy that really works for the brain and the nervous system. Horseboy was devised by autists and neuroscientists in Europe and the USA. There are now tens of thousands of families who benefit from the horseboy method, and we are in 20 countries. When I started this 3 years ago, we were in 7. So it's super exciting. We are the first location in Colorado, and we just expanded to the United States Air Force Academy Equestrian Center. And guess what? Our program works for veterans with PTSD as well as folks with autism. So we're really excited that's just kicked off there this year. And we help not only autism, but ADD, ADHD, anything really on the neurosensory issue. The whole premise of this is based on a father who had a severely autistic son and realized that when he put his son on the back of a horse, his son stopped having the autistic temper tantrums. So we're going to take a little look at an excerpt from the movie. Chris, if you could play this now. Thank you.
In April 2004, my son Rowan was diagnosed with autism. The feeling was like being hit across the face with a baseball bat. Our lives became clogged under a mountain of conflicting information on the disorder. We tried everything. He didn't speak to us. One day, he ran away from me and ran right up to a horse called Betsy. The moment I put Rowan on Betsy's back, he began to speak.
He's a nice horse.
As Rowan began to open up to me for the first time, a light bulb went on in my head. Was there a place on Earth that combined healing with horses? Mongolia. This is a story about how, as a family, we did something crazy. How we ended up going halfway across the world in search of a miracle.
I think it wasn't exactly Ron's vision of Mongolia.
We're going to go up a several thousand-foot mountain and perform a 4-hour ritual with shamans. Isn't that what all families do? Sometimes I think he's like leaping forward, and sometimes it's like he's totally regressing. I couldn't help wondering, did I really have his best interest at heart here?
I don't know how useful it is to think of us as normal and Rowan as the thick one.
And then something happened. Rowan began laughing, giggling. We were together again as a family. His autism forced me to listen to what interested him above all else. We're onto something good here.
So now you have a sense how this journey started. After this journey, Rupert thought to himself, well, if this works for my son, and there's so many children being diagnosed with autism, could it work for other children? So he decided that he would chat with some folks who are on the autism spectrum. And one of the most famous people on the autism spectrum is Dr. Temple Grandin. I'm sure many of you have heard of Temple. She is a professor in animal science at CSU. And if you've ever hung out with Temple, she's pretty autistic, but she has an amazing public persona. So Rupert consulted with her, also having the experience with his own son, and she said there were a couple things you should do. Number one is follow the child. Follow them intellectually, follow them emotionally, follow them physically. So that means if they're a runner, you are running with them. And do it in nature and let them move. So I wanted to pose a question to the group and ask you, what's your single most important educational experience? And I know that's a big question, and I think Scott could answer that pretty easily with what he just showed us. Anybody have anything they'd like to share? Say that again, Mary? The chat, okay. The French chat, the Pickens County Library. I know for me, if I look back, it's a lot of experiential moments. And it's not sitting behind a desk having a teacher talking to you. Last year, I had an interesting experience while we were delivering services to veterans with PTSD. And we had an art therapist on site, and she opened up what we were doing to the volunteers on the site. And I'm somebody who likes to plan and control, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm feeling moved to do this. And it was a moment where I felt like I had a breakthrough of not following a plan and realized that something really good could come out of it. So now what I want to do is, before I get into the theory of horseboy, is have a little fun with everybody. So what I'd like to do is ask you to all stand up if you are able. Okay, and now we're going to just jog in place a little bit. I was going to do 20 seconds. Maybe we'll just do 10. We're going to get the energy moving. I don't have the fun music that Gina had, but maybe I should have Gina singing with me up here. Okay. Okay, now we can stop. And what I'd like to do, usually I divide the room in half and have you split to either side, but just because we have some space constraints, we're going to make some adjustments here. So find a partner, your neighbor. It doesn't need to be anybody you know. Okay. And now what I'd like you to do is just back up a couple steps from each other. And now I'm going to teach you something while you are moving, okay? So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to walk towards your partner, and you're going to give them a high five. Awesome. Great, great job. Okay, now you're going to walk towards your partner, give them a high five, and clap. Okay? And now you're going to back up, and we're going to start learning a new song. Some of you might know this. I don't know. And I cannot sing, so forgive me for my voice here. But as you're walking, I'm going to shout out the first phrase of the song. You're going to do your clap, high five, and then you're going to back up and repeat that phrase of the song to me. And we're going to go through the song, okay? Bear with me. All right, so walk towards each other, and here is the song. 50 nifty United States. Okay, now go forward. From 13 original colonies. This is awesome. Okay, 50 nifty stars in the flag. That billows so beautifully in the breeze. Okay, you ready to take it from the top? Let's try, ready? And keep moving, we're gonna go forward and back. Ready? 50 nifty United States from the 13 original colonies. 50 nifty stars in the flag that billows so beautifully in the breeze. Yay! Okay, now I want everybody to look at each other. Do you see so many smiles? Yes. And do you see open body language? People relaxing. Okay, so now you are ready to learn. Okay. So now you can sit down. You can sit down. And we'll take a look quickly here at the neuroscience and how this works. And all you scientists here will understand this in much greater detail than I do. I just know that I know this works. So folks on the autism spectrum, Temple tells us, have really overactive amygdalas. And they're flooded with cortisol. So you saw Rowan have that temper tantrum. That is super common in kids with autism. And so what's triggering that? they, having this overactive amygdala, they live in a constant state of stress with a brain flooded with cortisol. So what we're trying to do is reverse that. And we reverse that through movement. And I know that in neuroscience, cortisol, it's very much needed to help us deal with those flight, stressful situations. But too much of it is not good and can cause damage to the brain. And so what we're trying to do with our process is help reverse that. So there's that fun thing that our brain does by rebuilding itself, neuroplasticity. And we, part of what I want to impart to you is that the solution is not totally in the brain, but rather it's the brain working with the body and the psoas muscle. So the psoas muscle really tenses up when you are triggered. And you're in that fight or flight. Scott was talking about a tiger coming after you. We talk about a rhinoceros coming through the wall. For somebody with autism, that can be bad lighting. It can be fluorescent lighting. It can be industrial noise. It can be being too cold. It can be being too hot. There are any number of things that can set them off. And what we're trying to do is relax the psoas muscle. And that's what we just did with you with the fun little song and learning. So the antidote to cortisol is that happy hormone called oxytocin. And all we are about at Smiling Goat Ranch and the Horseboy Method is producing oxytocin. And there are so many ways to do this. You can do it by rocking, you can do it by running, you can do it by dancing, you can do it by jogging. And one of the greatest places to do it is from the back of a cantering horse. So I want to show you a very quick clip here of, I have a great volunteer corps, and in this particular clip, there's a group of enthusiastic teenagers, and we're working with a child who's nonverbal, and we're gonna do a math problem with him. And his mom came to us and said, he doesn't understand double-digit math. So we break it down, and you'll hear him say 4 + 3 is 7 + 10, and then we'll go on to the canter. Whoops. Chris, could you?
4 + 3 = 40, 50, 60. Yes! 17! Yay! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17!
Yay. Yeah, it's pretty exciting, pretty exciting. Then I want to show you another quick clip. And this is a child that's too big for us to back ride in the saddle with, so we're long lining him. And he is also nonverbal. And this particular clip went viral in our community, and you will see why. Go ahead, Chris. So that's a lot of oxytocin. Yeah. Okay, I don't have a lot of time left because there's another clip I want to get to too, but I'm quickly going to go through sensory work, and that is where we use body-to-body contact, human to horse. We have 3 different positions we put people in, and you'll see that top photo. That is a veteran, and she's doing what we call the butt hug. And some veterans get up there and actually fall asleep. Anybody want to guess what our record is for how long somebody stayed asleep on the back of our horse? Any guesses? Hour? Somebody said an hour. Hour and a half. 2 hours. And I had a horse that loved it too, and it was amazing. And the veterans get off of the horse and they have these incredible emotional releases. Some are moved to tears. It's really, really powerful. So I'm going to skip right over to, you're invited to come down and see us anytime. Give us a call. Tomorrow we have play dates starting at 9 a.m. And it's going to be a multi-family play date. On July 29th, we actually have a group of veterans coming, and we'll put them through sensory work, and we'll ride with them. And we have a table outside, so come say hi. And I want to play this clip before I have to wrap up. It's some testimonials from some of the veterans who've come down to work with us.
I've never done equine therapy, but it was really amazing to be able to bond with the horses and be able to draw our warrior symbol on them and how we felt, and so we had a really good time with the horses.
I'm overwhelmed by the support that I've found here. I came down here to the Smiling Goat Ranch, and they put us in a big old circle, and I was a little bit hesitant, reluctant at first, but after we got through introductions and realized that every other person I didn't recognize was a volunteer there to help me and my fellow vets, it was reassuring and humbling a little bit to realize that there were so many people out there willing to help us.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to move on to Healthy Brain. Let's see. Yeah, Carol Lee, where are you? Here she comes. Carol Lee, the chair and president of Access Circles.
Thank you.
A board member of Aspen Brain Institute.
Thank you, Glenda. Good morning. I am the founder of Access Circles, which is a network that brings together women to transform their health. We partner with leading institutions who bring us wisdom, knowledge beyond our wildest dreams. And one of them is Brigham Health and Harvard University, and I'm especially honored to introduce Chuck Cheisler. Chuck and I had the pleasure of meeting last year at Aspen Brain Health Fest, and then we had the pleasure of having dinner so I could learn how many hours of sleep I need. But like all of you, I'm attached to my iPhone. This is a problem. You can't use your iPhone about 2 hours before, and lots of other good tips that Chuck gave us. But what he really told us, which Sharon, Glenda, and myself, which was, I thought, the most startling, was that he had been talking to the wrong people all this time. He had been talking to men who didn't listen to him. The women now, he said, are really listening and taking his advice. So Chuck, I know everyone wants to hear it. Thank you so much. How are you?
Thank you so much.
Great to see you.
Great to see you again. And thank you for the invitation here to all the organizers. I'm really honored to be here at the Aspen Brain Labs. And I welcome the opportunity to share with you what I've learned about the importance of sleep for brain health and the impact, the influence of the brain on aging. So what I'd like to do is to begin by just pointing out how sleep deprived we are as a society. Only 1 out of 3 Americans report that they regularly get a sufficient amount of sleep. 50 million Americans a month struggle to stay awake while they're on the nation's highways, resulting in more than 1 million crashes every year, 50,000 debilitating injuries and nearly 7,000 deaths every year. It's one out of 5 car crashes and serious car crash injuries. So it's an amazing problem. I think of that as a barometer of how sleep deprived we are as a society. And it doesn't just impact safety in that way, but it also impacts our brain's emotional health. You know, when we're sleep deprived, we get burned out, we are more likely to suffer from depression, increased risk of suicide, anxiety disorders, and just a emotional lability that happens when we have not gotten enough sleep. The amygdala, which is the area of the brain that was just talked about with respect to the previous presentation, is the emotional center of the brain. And when we haven't gotten enough sleep, the same stimulus, the same disturbing images or whatever is done, even in a brain scanning, the amygdala has 10 times the response when we haven't gotten enough sleep. And that's why we become more emotionally volatile. So why does the brain need sleep anyway? Sleep, when I was starting, was thought to be of the brain, for the brain, and by the brain. We now know that it also is important for the body. But one of the things that sleep does for the brain is that it restores the energy stores that we have in the brain. The brain uses more energy by weight than any other part of the body. It's only 2 to 3% of the weight of the body, and yet the brain uses 20 to 30% of all the oxygen that we consume and all of the glucose energy that we consume. So it's a tremendously high energy burning organ. And when we have depleted the energy, which is in the form of adenosine triphosphate, when we burn off those high energy phosphate bonds, we're left with adenosine. And as adenosine levels rise in the brain, that signals us that we need to get to sleep. We feel sleepy. So I see many people here have an adenosine antagonist that they may be using to help them, which is one of the most commonly used drugs in the world, and of course it is caffeine. And that masks that signal so that we don't realize that we need the sleep. And so when we don't restore that energy, we feel fatigued, sluggish. That's what results in the burnout that I was talking about before. The other important function of sleep is memory consolidation. So during the beginning of sleep, during deep, slow-wave sleep at the beginning of the night, that's when we consolidate the memories for what we learned during the daytime. And that happens in the beginning of the night. We store away those memories. And that happens, by the way, and we rehearse what we've done during the daytime. And those rehearsals in the storage of those memories happen at 15, 20, 25 times real time. So if you've learned a new piece on the piano with your right hand, the area that controls the movement of that hand will have much deeper slow-wave sleep in the beginning of the night, and we'll be rehearsing that over and over again. So you'll be able to do it much more quickly with fewer errors the next day. And if we don't do that high-intensity rehearsal, then we don't gain, we don't consolidate those memories after sleep, and we become more forgetful. And that can masquerade as cognitive impairment, particularly as we get older. And so we may think that we're sort of losing it because we can't remember things, but that may be because our sleep is in some way disturbed. Then, in the latter half of the night, if your alarm doesn't go off a couple of hours before you should be waking up, how many people here spontaneously awaken in the morning without an alarm clock? That is fantastic. And I applaud you for being able to do that. So many people are enslaved to the alarm clock, waking them up in the morning. And when that happens, you lose the last couple of hours of sleep, which are deeply enriched in rapid eye movement sleep. That's the sleep stage associated with vivid dreaming. In that sleep stage, we integrate the information that we learned and we stored in the beginning of sleep with everything that we already knew before that. And that's when we begin to solve problems. And the session on sleep could also be in the creative brain, because if we don't get that rapid eye movement sleep, and by the way, that happens in real time. So if you're watching a ping pong game, your eyes are going back and forth at the rate that it takes the ping pong to go back and forth across the table. But if we don't do that integration and have these bizarre dreams, then that impairs our creativity and problem solving. And finally, and this is one of the most recently understood phenomenon in the last 5 years or so, and that is that during sleep, critical brain maintenance activities happen. And we clear waste that is built up during the day. So any high energy utilization system, if you're burning a lot of energy, just like your furnace, it needs to be cleared out because gunk and soot and everything accumulates. Well, in the brain, we accumulate molecules like amyloid beta, which are products of energy consumption. And if the amyloid beta accumulates and is not cleared out, then that's what causes neurodegeneration and conditions like cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. And that is at much greater risk in individuals who have disturbed sleep or for whatever reason are not getting enough sleep. And I'll show you some pictures. So these are newly discovered glymphatic channels in the brain that are sleeves that are where these molecules, this debris is removed. And here's a cartoon showing how that happens. These sleeves are around the arteries and the veins, and the arterioles and the venules. And there is convective flow. And none of this was realized 6 years ago. And if you see here, let's see, can I make a, I don't know if there's a pointer, but anyway, you can see in this cartoon, you see the black globs. That's the metabolic debris that's accumulating during wakefulness, during high brain activity associated with wakefulness. Well, that is being cleared by this convective flow of this newly discovered glymphatic system. And the amazing thing is that the support cells of the brain actually shrink during sleep, allowing these channels to become larger, and the convective flow is 2 to 3 times greater during sleep, and that's when you remove this gunk that has accumulated during wakefulness. But if you don't get the sleep that you need, then you're going to be at increased risk for cognitive impairment associated with the accumulation of these metabolic debris. Now, it's not just the brain that needs sleep, but also the body that needs sleep. And so the cardiovascular system needs sleep, and if we don't get the sleep that we need, then we are at increased risk for hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. Sleep is also critically important in the regulation of appetite. Someplace during evolution, sleep and appetite got linked. And maybe it's because no other animals stay awake all night unless they're starving. So the brain goes into starvation mode when we are not sleeping. And what does that mean? That means we squirrel away all the calories that we eat into fat when we're not sleeping, when we're not sleeping, and we become ravenously hungry, so we overeat. Any of you who have stayed up all night flying to, overseas, whatever, you become much more hungry, and you're not hungry for like salads. You want junk food, you want high carbohydrate foods, you want sugary snacks, and so on, because that's what the brain is craving. We release more of the hormone ghrelin that makes us hungry, and less of the hormone leptin that makes us satisfied with what we eat. And it is thought that the sleep deficiency that has been accumulating in the United States over the past 50 to 70 years, we've been getting less and less and less sleep, has associated with overeating and weight gain, and may be a contributing factor to the obesity epidemic that we have in the United States, where, not in Colorado, but in most of the United States, 2 out of 3 Americans are either overweight or obese. And interestingly, when you look at the obesity maps, they're parallel with the maps of where people are getting an insufficient amount of sleep by state. Now, not only is it related to appetite, But sleep deficiency is also related to our ability to maintain control of our glucose levels. So we normally fast during the night. At least during evolution we would have done that. And so we release a hormone, melatonin, that both helps us to sleep at night, but it also impairs the activity of insulin so that we become insulin resistant. And it helps the brain maintain glucose levels throughout the night. Great. But this system evolved at a time when we didn't have access to food at night. So now we open the refrigerator and we eat when that hormone is being released. Or we take melatonin because we think, oh, this is going to help us sleep. And then just before going to bed, we have a snack or we eat during the night. Now our glucose levels are going to go much higher and can put us in a pre-diabetic state or increase the risk of frank diabetes. So eating at night is a problem. And if you restrict your eating to 12 hours a day, and most Americans eat every moment that they're awake, but if you restrict your eating to 12 hours a day, you can actually eat the same amount and you will lose weight. It's remarkable. In fact, if you do two things, if you restrict your eating to 12 hours a day and you get a sufficient amount of sleep, you will actually lose fat when you go on a diet. If you're getting an insufficient amount of sleep when you go on a diet, 75% of the weight that you lose will be in lean body mass, your muscles, and not fat, because your brain is in starvation mode, so you'll be squirreling away everything you eat into fat, even though you're restricting the amount of food that you're eating. So maintenance of insulin glucose regulation, if you're getting an insufficient amount of sleep, it increases the risk of metabolic syndrome and diabetes. And finally, the immune system is affected by sleep deficiency. So, I always wonder why the government doesn't say when it's time for the flu season for everybody to make sure they get a sufficient amount of sleep before they get the flu shot, because you only have half the antibody response if you're sleep deprived when you get the flu shot in the week before you get the flu shot as compared to if you're getting a sufficient amount of sleep. And similarly, if during the winter you're exposed to the rhinovirus, if you're not getting enough sleep, you have a 200 to 300% increased risk of actually catching a cold. And most people know this. I mean, they say, I'm run down, I got a cold. Well, it's not that they suddenly, when they weren't run down, they were still being exposed to the rhinovirus, but they don't succumb to the infection. Okay, so in order to thrive, one of the simplest things that we can do is to make sure that we get enough sleep. And for the average adult, that means 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Children need more sleep. High school kids need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Toddlers in their first year of life need at least 12 hours of sleep. In fact, if children get less than 12 hours of sleep in their first year of life, they have a 300% increased risk of being overweight when they start preschool. I mean, it's at every age. 12-year-old girls and boys, if they're not getting enough sleep at that age, when they're 30, they have a much greater risk of being overweight. So during development is the most critical time, and that's why it's so unfortunate the high schools are starting school at 7 in the morning. It was known a century ago. Here in the United States, it was demonstrated that if you start before 9 o'clock in the morning, the schools, that the children will get, if you start at 7, they'll get 2 hours less sleep. And Professor Terman at Stanford in 1911 said we must never go to the European system of starting at 7 o'clock in the morning because our kids will miss the sleep that they critically need. And now we're starting at 7, and in Europe they're starting at 9. So duration is critically important. The second key aspect is timing, which is just as important, a consistent bedtime and a consistent wake time. And that's why I always say, on your iPhones, there's an opportunity, or smartphones, there's an opportunity to actually set an alarm for bedtime. We set an alarm for wake time. We should be setting it for bedtime to remind us to make sure that we get the sleep that we need. And the final aspect is sleep quality. And what do I mean by sleep quality? Well, I'll show you in a minute, but sleep disorders are one of the biggest things that degrade the quality of sleep. So summarizing, the number of hours awake contribute to our fatigue during the daytime. If we're getting an insufficient amount of sleep every night, that'll build up a sleep debt, which will degrade our ability to function. If we're trying to stay awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and our brain is geared to being asleep at that time, like we travel across time zones, that's going to cause fatigue. If we have just awoken, I mean, most couples realize, you know, in the first few minutes after awakening, this is not the time to have an intense discussion. You know, better to have a shower, that's good for the relationship. Because people don't even, you know, they're so degraded during those first few minutes of awakening that they may say something inappropriate. But let's talk about sleep disorders. So sleep disorders, the big four are insomnia, sleep apnea, shift work disorder, and restless leg syndrome. I'm going to really talk mostly about insomnia and sleep apnea. Let's start with sleep apnea. So sleep apnea is a condition where you can't breathe and sleep at the same time, and that's a problem. So everybody thinks it's associated with snoring, and snoring is one of the symptoms of sleep apnea. But the real problem is when you stop snoring, okay, and have witnessed apneas. So if you have a bed partner and the bed partner is driving up the wall because of the snoring and so on, and then you think, oh, they've stopped snoring, thank God, make sure they're breathing. So I'm going to show you a video, and I'm going to ask you, you know, Glenda said, you know, we can't have too many videos. Well, this is a video where we're actually watching someone snoring during sleep, and I want you to stop breathing when he stops breathing. Can you turn up the volume so we can hear the snoring, please? Nice, good snore. Another good snore. Great, everything's going well. Everything's fine. Get ready to stop breathing. Oh, stop breathing. Hold your breath now. I want everybody to hold your breath. See if you can hold your breath as long as he can, even though we haven't done cold therapy. I know that. He's still not breathing. Still not breathing. All right, you can breathe. Don't get too relaxed, though. He's going to stop breathing again. Now, when he stops breathing, okay, stop breathing, everybody. When he stops breathing, you can recognize how your heart is beginning to race, how your blood pressure is rising. So during sleep, the cardiovascular system is supposed to be getting the rest that it needs. With sleep apnea, these recurrent, and this happens 200 to 300 times per night. All right, you can breathe again. 200 to 300 times per night. So you can understand why it increases the risk of cardiovascular death by 420%. So let's look at some historical data of individuals. They were 48 when they started the study. At the time, it was thought if you didn't complain of daytime sleepiness, you shouldn't be treated. So the epidemiologists just followed them and said, what happens? Okay, so 100% of them are alive at the beginning. Now, there's a little fall off at the beginning, but they're still doing okay. But look at that. After 10 to 15 years, the survival among those with sleep apnea is 58% as compared to 94% of the people who would have been who were 66 at the time that this happened. So 18 years later. And those who, of the 58% who are still alive, they had cognitive impairment 10 years earlier and Alzheimer's disease 5 years earlier. So we're talking about a very serious, you know, everybody laughs when somebody snores. It's not a joke. It's a very serious health condition that directly affects the brain. And so, and it happens most commonly in people who are overweight and people who are snorers. Children who snore, even once an hour, you know, grade school children, they need to have their tonsils out usually because it can really impair their ability to learn in school and give them a lifelong problem. So, and the good news is that sleep apnea is treatable, either with the CPAP machine, oral appliances like like a retainer that you put in when you, dental retainer that moves forward your lower jaw by about 2 to 3 millimeters, and even certain types of surgeries. Chronic insomnia, also not as dramatically, but increases the risk of premature death. Instead of increasing it by 6 times like sleep apnea does, it doubles the risk of death. And again, the great news is that cognitive behavioral therapy is a terrific treatment for insomnia. It's available online through programs like Sleepio and Shut-Eye, and therapists are able to administer it. Relaxation techniques like meditation, yoga, deep breathing, proper sleep hygiene, a consistent bedtime, wake time, and medications can be used on a short-term basis. The wonderful news is that even individuals in incredibly sleep-challenged environments, like firefighters, we can increase dramatically their sleep duration, sleep quality, and improve their daytime alertness. We can reduce their risk of injury by 25% and cut in half their disability day usage with this kind of a program. In fact, we just won the National Safety Council Green Cross for Safety Innovation Award this year through this program. So what can you do? For the astronauts, we just relamped the International Space Station to provide tunable lighting where we can expose them to shorter wavelength light in the morning and longer wavelength light in the evening. You can keep a consistent sleep schedule, allow enough time in bed to sleep a sufficient amount each night, maintain a cool, dark, quiet environment for sleep, establish a relaxing nightly routine, exercise regularly during the daytime. It takes 2 hours to metabolize each shot or glass of wine. So I'm not suggesting that everyone become a day drinker, but you should account for that because alcohol interferes with sleep. Keep electronics, as Glenda said, out of the bedroom, and limit your exposure to blue-enriched light in the evening. I would avoid off-label use of medications like Benadryl and Tylenol PM. Melatonin can be helpful, but you need to get pharmaceutical-grade melatonin. Pure Encapsulations and REM Fresh are 2 brands that are pharmaceutical grade, and you ideally want to take sub-milligram doses. Keep the sleep stealers out of your environment, like the iPhone, the cigarettes. Caffeine has a 6 to 9 hour half-life. Dogs, I love dogs. We have 2 dogs. They don't belong in the bedroom. And with that, I will end. It can really transform your life. You will have more energy during the daytime. Your memory will be better. You will be, you'll even look better. There's a study showing that people who have lost a night of sleep and taken portrait images, all shaved, cleaned up, and versus people who have slept the night before, people can recognize when they're shown these images within 4 seconds, and they want to spend time. These are the same people. They want to spend time with the ones who've slept. They don't want to get near the ones who are sleep deprived. So it does affect how you look as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good times. It's time for a healthy breakfast brain break. Please go outside, help yourself to a healthy buffet, and we're going to start again in a half hour. Thank you.
Good morning still, I believe, yes. I am Catherine Ann Couch, as Glenda just said, and I'm so privileged to be a board member of the Aspen Brain Institute and to be here today. And I have the great honor to introduce Rod Stryker. Rod is widely considered to be one of the most preeminent yoga and meditation teachers in the United States and indeed the world. He is the founder of Para Yoga, which is a modern way of bringing ancient techniques of breathing, meditation, and yoga to benefit both the body and the mind. He's also the author of The 4 Desires, Creating a Life of Purpose, Happiness, Prosperity, and Freedom. He's about to launch an app called Sanctuary, which will bring all of his amazing teachings to a wider public. He is also about to come out with his second book, Enlightened Sleep. And today he's going to give us insights into this enlightened sleep through the technique of Yoga Nidra. I won't say any more about Yoga Nidra because I'll let Rod do all this. Tomorrow, as you may know, that there is a program at the Aspen Chapel from 2 to 4 going more deeply into Yoga Nidra. And for those of you who have already purchased tickets, congratulations, because it is now sold out. If you know that you're not going to be able to come, please let us know because there's a waiting list and we'd like to let those others in. But now I'd like to bring up Rod Stryker. He's a good friend and a very special person, and we're so thrilled that he was able to join us today.
Thank you, Catherine Ann, and thank you to the AspenBrainLab for inviting me to share. I've heard about the AspenBrainLab for many years. I live here in the Valley. I have the privilege of living here in the Valley. And last year, I was the guest of someone I actually got to attend, and I heard Walter Isaacson begin, I believe, it was the first thing I had heard, and I believe he began the event with it, and he was speaking about his latest book on Da Vinci. And really, Da Vinci was my biggest hero as a young man, and I don't know how many boys, it might be a baseball player, but for me there was something so compelling about Da Vinci, and if nothing else, it was the fact that he was this master of this integration of science, art, and perhaps even an appreciation of divinity, what lies beyond. And maybe it's Da Vinci that brings me here, or my love of Da Vinci that brings me here, because in a way, what I'm going to speak about today is an intersection of science and Eastern contemplative traditions. And the subject, as Catherine Ann described, was the idea of what's called Yoga Nidra. So in short, I'm going to start to go into that in a little bit greater depth, but I want to introduce a couple ideas first. But in short, what Yoga Nidra means is yoga, we could translate as awareness or experience or union, and sleep translates, or excuse me, Nidra translates as sleep. So Yoga Nidra is a practice that's really more than we see it in various texts that are more than 1,000 years old. So it's been around for quite some time, and we're at a kind of interesting juncture now as it relates to the needs to our culture and our society and how technology has impacted so many of us, that I really think we stand at a turning point in Yoga Nidra becoming a significant contributor to keeping us sane and healthy. And so I want to just, before I start to go into the subject directly, I actually would like to ask you one or two things. First of all, how many of you feel absolutely rested? Absolutely rested. Okay, so I would guess from where I'm standing that's less than 5%, which is probably accurate. Now I'm going to ask you, that was the easy one. Now I'm going to ask you a harder one, and that is, what's the purpose of life? I'll give you a little time, as much as you need. What is the purpose of life? And I'm going to speak to that. Really, that's what this whole conversation is, and hopefully what I can contribute to this gathering. In short, what I would tell you is that the purpose of life is twofold. Number one, to learn how not to suffer, to have less suffering. And number two would be to contribute to the world what it is that you are precisely gifted to contribute, to find your purpose. And we saw it on this first really extraordinary film you shared with us, Glenda. And that's what the gentleman said. He said, as long as you are alive, you have a purpose. So I would say that that is the purpose of life, is number one, to figure out how to suffer less, and number two, how to find your unique purpose. Indeed, part two of that is the subject of my book, The Four Desires. But it's the first one I want to speak a little bit about today, and in how this conjuncts, what's the conjunction of that idea and Yoga Nidra. Really, if we think about it, we think that all of the developments we've seen in civilization, from the kind of capturing of harnessing of fire, what we did to electricity, and to the neurology that we celebrate so much of here in AspenBrainLab, to engineering, to architecture, to all of it, in a way, is to help us suffer less. All of these advents of technology, indeed, are to serve a purpose, which is to help us, in a way, move toward having more fulfillment. Now, in the Eastern tradition of this idea, there's really two fundamental approaches to this and two kind of focuses. One focus of having more or less suffering, let's say more pleasure or less suffering, more fulfillment, less suffering, would be to master the outside world. And so that is what civilization has done so brilliantly, and in many ways the West has spearheaded. We're kind of the tip of the spear in this, and that is this incredible build-up and how we continue to kind of snowball this whole development of technology. It's really quite extraordinary. And so the principle of that is that on a worldly level, we continue to get more fulfilled. We have more at our disposal, we have more freedom, we have more, as it were, choices. The Eastern tradition, however, says, but there's an entirely different way to accumulate knowledge and develop knowledge over time, and it doesn't lead to circumstantial happiness, it leads to lasting fulfillment. It leads to not circumstantial happiness, but lasting fulfillment. And how do we gain knowledge that allows us to be less at the mercy of circumstances to determine our happiness? This is actually the introduction to the concept and to the discussion of Yoga Nidra. In a way, it's really compelling to us to say, what do I have to know in order to touch upon lasting fulfillment? Now, something that modern science and these ancient seers have in common is the understanding that your senses are relatively weak when it comes to perceiving reality. Your senses, your five senses, what they see, what we hear, taste, touch, and smell, is about, well, the most optimistic studies I've seen about this is that you and I perceive about 8% of reality. So there's 92% of reality that's kind of just not being recognized. The less optimistic studies say that we see about 1.001% of reality. So right now, in the context of just this moment, you and I are seeing somewhere between 1/100th of 1% or possibly 8% of really what's occurring at this moment. That's kind of bad news if you're looking to fulfill the purpose of your life, which is to have more pleasure, because you're seeing very little. And this is the bad news. The good news is you sleep. Even if you don't sleep a lot, you sleep. And the ancient tradition held the idea of this, is that when you slept, you stepped into another world. Not a world of confusion or darkness, but actually a world in which discovery was a possibility, boundless discovery. So the setup for that is the idea that even when we are, when we're awake, we're at the mercy of our five senses plus our rational mind. In other words, we make up decisions and thoughts around the world based on those five senses and what they tell us. Right? So we get 5% of the evidence. I'm now averaging things out here. Maybe 4, maybe 2% of the evidence, and we make decisions about who we are, what's important, where we're going, the future of our life, what we need to fight for, what we don't need to fight for, what we need to react to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, based on 2% and then our limited learning. On the other hand, they said, and now what happens in dreams is just a kind of processing of those various experiences and projections, and so we're still within the confines of our five senses, aren't we? But what the seers recognized was that when you sleep, it all disappears. The doctor earlier spoke so eloquently and so comprehensively about the value of sleep, and he spoke about it in a physiological context. But now I'm going to speak about a little bit in terms of a psychological, emotional, and even spiritual context. That sleep provides us a window into boundlessness. The problem is that when we're sleeping, we're not seeing that we're resting in boundlessness. This is, in fact, what many sciences have now tried to do, is develop instruments for seeing what we don't normally see. So where we think about the particle accelerator in Switzerland, or we even saw the few cartoons about how the brain is processing and digesting toxins when you sleep, we're developing instruments that see beyond what our five senses can see. But still, we're at the mercy of comprehending what we're seeing based on what we're seeing through our five senses. So even that cartoon I had to perceive through my five senses. So now what I want to offer is that the yogis literally developed a way to have it the best of both worlds, which is to remain conscious while sleeping. And that's what they called Yoga Nidra. Yoga Nidra basically is a way of fundamentally relaxing very deeply. Now, here's the news, and I don't have a lot of time to speak about this very rich subject today. But so what I would tell you is that Yoga Nidra itself is the intersection of the deepest state of meditation combined with deep sleep. Physiologically, what it ultimately means is that you are in the non-REM, deep wave, slow wave sleep. You're in that stage the doctor was telling us about where physiologically there's tremendous repair going on. There's all of this kind of pruning of memory and all of the vital reserves that are occurring. Well, that's what we're going to enter through Yoga Nidra. I didn't hear you speak to the idea that, one thing that should be said, although dream, the process of nature and adaptation has allowed sleep to be what it is, but the fact is it's relatively ineffective when it comes to deep sleep. And by that, again, I mean slow wave, the third stage of deep sleep. The deepest sleep actually only occurs about 20%, 20 to 25% over 8 hours. We heard how 8 hours is ideal, but only about 20% of it is in this deep sleep. Well, the yogis found ways to deeply relax that would generate that same slow wave deep sleep within 10 to 15 minutes. So that means that within 30 minutes to 40 minutes of this process, you gain something like 20% of what you need in terms of deep sleep over a night. In other words, if you do a session of Yoga Nidra in about 40 minutes, you get about an eighth or a sixth of what you need. Now, I don't know if this is true, and I went up to try and ask the doctor at the break about this, but not so long ago, I read in the New York Times talked about phases of sleep. And instead of necessarily having to get 8 to 9 hours every night, that if we got 6 to 7 and then took a nap, it would have the same beneficial effect as if we slept 9. And you're shaking your head in the affirmative. Is that correct? So this is where Yoga Nidra really comes in a very pragmatic sense, incredibly usefully. Because in that lull that most of us experience around 2 to 3, that's not just because your coffee is worn out. The fact is that there is a physiological phase where you need to sleep more. You need another little sleep. And there's a startling statistic around when the Spanish gave up siestas. Within 8 years, they did studies on this, and the incidence of heart attacks went up 66% in men. Men actually more susceptible to heart attacks. In other words, when they weren't sleeping and taking their naps in the afternoon, I'm giving you permission to take a nap. But more importantly, I will invite you to do Yoga Nidra during that time because of how quickly it allows us to enter this place of deep sleep. And now within Yoga Nidra, interestingly, there are actually processes that are somewhat similar to dreaming, that you actually allow yourself to consciously dream. So How much time do I have, actually? I didn't look what time it was when I came up. Can someone tell me?
You have
7 minutes. It's a lifetime. So let me tell you, there has not been a lot of research, but this is very much a science-based discussion. My grand teacher was one of the first and only masters of this science to be tested in a laboratory. And this was early days of EEGs and EKGs, and in the late 70s, he did these tests at the Menninger Institute in Kansas. And he defied, at the time, scientists' understanding of what was possible. So by all measures, he was sleeping. He would do this practice, and he would tell them, listen, while I'm in this state of sleep, I will be fully conscious of what's happening in the environment. I said, no, you won't be. Because that is one of the key symptoms, if you will, of sleeping, is that there may be noises going on and sirens going on, and if you live in a city or your kids are making noise or the dogs are barking next door, and if you're sleeping deeply, you're unaware of it. So he said, I'll be aware of that. So by all measures, they gave him a chance to do this practice, which is, again, doesn't take very long to enter, and it's really simple. That's the real beauty of it, and I want to emphasize that point before I finish. And he dropped into this state, and they say, by all measures, predominant delta wave pattern, he's asleep. Well, as prearranged, the scientist had a conversation in the room while he was sleeping. After coming out of the state, he told them verbatim what they had said. He had heard everything, and yet, by all measures, he was asleep. And he said, but that's only part of it. Let's do something else. I'll do the practice again, but this time be in a different room. They said, a different room. You won't be able to hear us. He said it didn't matter. So they did the process. They went into, I guess, again, you can read about this. It's all been documented. They went into a room, other soundproofing in between him and them. They had this, another conversation. He was in the state of sleep, and he told them what they said, verbatim. So what this means is that our 5 senses are limited. It's kind of unacceptable or very hard to fathom that someone could not only be asleep and hear people, but he could hear people in a place where his senses couldn't normally perceive it anyway. And what it suggests is that you and I see very little of reality. And that as we begin to disengage with our senses, we begin to activate awareness, intelligence, or consciousness, excuse me. And this is where, in a sense, science is really just making the most interesting discoveries around, and this is still the big question in science, I believe, is what is consciousness? What is the physiology of consciousness? What is it, and how does it differ from brain? We would argue that brain is the instrument of consciousness. That's from the Eastern contemplative traditions. So, in short, I just want to, again, just wrap things up. Here's what I'd like to just say in closing around this idea, and that is that it is through the quietude in the mind that it makes it possible for us to perceive what normally we don't perceive. Again, from the tradition of the East, it suggests that our inherent nature is creativity. Our inherent nature is capacity. Our inherent nature is intuition. And now science has actually shown us that when we become stressful, the brain goes into a default mode called exploitation, which means that we keep looping the information that we have operated from in the past. When we become stressed, our brain circulates what we already know and reuses it and reapplies it again and again and again. When we become relaxed, when we begin to stimulate or activate delta patterns and do it consciously, not just through sleep, sleep is deeply meaningful, but when we begin to do it either through meditation or through yoga nidra, what I'm making the case for today, what I like to call enlightened sleep, the brain shifts into its normative pattern, which is exploration. And Glenda, we celebrate the idea of creative brain here. What I would say is the brain by default is creative. Your brain by default solves problems. That's its nature. And it does so in ever new and creative ways. But it can only do so when you relax. That's the science of this. So having said that, what I would suggest, and I was having some conversations last night in preparation for today with some of the members of the board and some of their friends and supporters. And I don't know if I had one conversation with anyone who said, how do I sleep more? How can you help? You know, what does this say? With regular practice, this thing called enlightened sleep allows us to trigger enough of the parasympathetic response, which we've also heard about today, so that in time you begin to change the direction. You begin to create a kind of operative balance in your nervous system, autonomic nervous system, that allows you to rest and sleep more deeply. Also, enlightened sleep or yoga nidra can be used as a way to prepare for sleep. And let me make that last suggestion, make that last point as I leave you. To sleep deeply is not just a physiological phenomenon, it's also a psychological or mental phenomenon. And by that I mean, we've all experienced moments in our life where we've been physically tired, but mentally activated. Other times we're mentally exhausted, but physically stimulated. And both speak to the idea that it's difficult to fall asleep. Whether we're physically tired and mentally active, or mentally tired and physically active. So somehow we need the cooperation or the integration of the mind and the body to sleep deeply. I was taught that in order to sleep deeply, you have to prepare for sleep. And something that we can all do, I have some people coming tomorrow, but something that we can all do is as you get into bed, take 5 to 10 minutes, never mind, we put the phones away now, but simply slow down your breath consciously. And within 5 minutes, you will feel a dramatic shift. That's where you begin to set really the stage to be able to sleep deeply. And then finally, we can also use sleep when we learn how to bring awareness with it to discover there is more to us than we see in the mirror. I want to again thank you, Glenda, and thank you to the Aspen Brain Institute Lab. Thank you very much.
Is my mic on? Is Sharon? Sharon, are you here? I'm changing the order a little bit, and I want to introduce Future Brain. Go to Dr. Hare. I'm just going to, we just changed the order of things just a moment. I want to introduce a different segment called, is this on? Future Brain. If you think the world has changed dramatically in the last 5 years, you haven't seen anything yet. Things are happening at such a rapid pace that we are simply constantly challenging accepted ideas, just like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland, who can only remember the future instead of the past. And she likes to remember and think of 6 impossible things before breakfast. And I just love her. But one thing I've read recently, and this is about Future Brain, if a rat's brain can be trained to detect landmines in Mozambique, then what are the untold possibilities for the human brain? So now we're going to have a few examples of Future Brain from the speakers that we have here today. And Sharon Handler, the president of our board, is going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
So just to correct it so everyone knows my proper name, it's Sharon Handler Loeb. My husband is out in the audience. First of all, I just want to make a comment about this conference. I know that some of you are here for the first time, and others of you have been supporters and seekers of knowledge about the brain and have been here before. I will not take the time now, but I have to tell you, I know so many stories about how people who have come to this conference and listened to the 4 categories of the brain have had that moment where one piece of information from what they've learned here has either helped to change their lives because they had an illness that no one could explain or diagnose, and someone here was able to contact someone on their behalf. Another person realizes that they had a concussion and never treated it and were in trouble because it was 3 years later and they were suffering from headaches. To even my husband, the information about sleep apnea that Dr. Chesler has talked about. I was one of those wives who came in and at one point realized my husband wasn't breathing. And then he started breathing again, and I thought, oh, how wonderful, he's sleeping quietly. And then I remembered what I was told, and so I am one of those people that can say I'm responsible for making my husband's life a longer, healthier one. So, anyway, forgive me if I'm going to be speaking quickly, but we are kept on a tight schedule as far as how long our introductions can be. This is going to be difficult with our next speaker, Dr. Joshua Hare, as he is one of the world's pioneers in stem cell therapy. This therapy is emerging as the most promising new treatment option for chronic diseases and injuries affecting human organs. It is regenerative medicine. It is the future of medicine, and it has arrived. Both my husband and I have been at the facility that Joshua Hare has created. It is impressive, his work is impressive, and he's not only impressive as a doctor, but as a man of great intelligence and compassion, which I think is extremely important as we move forward in the world of medicine in general. I do not use the word impressive lightly. Dr. Hare is the founding director of the Interdisciplinary Stem Cell Institute at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, as well as the co-founder of Longeveron, a life sciences company developing biological solutions for aging, something that is a very interesting, expanding science. Dr. Hare comes out of Johns Hopkins with 2 fellowships, Harvard and Brigham and Women's Hospital. He's led the heart failure program at Johns Hopkins, and when he finally arrived at the University of Miami, in 2007, he founded the Stem Cell Initiative, which has currently expanded its research into 15 areas of disease, including Alzheimer's and stroke. I know it's time for me to stop, but I must mention one more amazing accomplishment. Dr. Hare currently holds more than 16 FDA-approved investigative new drugs for cell-based therapies. Talk about our future. Please help me join in welcoming the very impressive friend of mine, Dr. Joshua Hare.
Thank you, Sharon, for that very, very kind introduction. I was looking around wondering who actually you were talking about. It really is a great privilege to be here, particularly for many reasons. It's a wonderful meeting, but I'm a cardiologist, so what's a cardiologist doing at a brain meeting? So let me tell you why. Through our work at the Stem Cell Institute, we've become very interested in how the body heals itself, and we think that's one of the key clues and one of the things that we've missed in medicine and biology for the last couple of centuries. So I'm going to talk about how stem cells can spark the regenerative powers of the human brain. All of the work that I'm going to talk to you about has been done at the University of Miami at the Interdisciplinary Stem Cell Institute and at the company Longeveron that licensed technologies from the University of Miami. All of our work has been published in the scientific literature, and if anybody has wants more details about anything I've said, please, I urge you to email me, and I can send you original scientific publications. So these are the 4 areas I'd like to cover. Can the human brain regenerate itself? How can this regeneration be harnessed to treat incurable diseases such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or even mood disorders like depression? What is the role of stem cells in this, and what does this mean for human health and aging? So I'm going to start out with regeneration. What is regeneration? And this is actually the thing that got me interested in this field. Much of what I've done as an adult I realized was sparked by events that occurred to me as a child, and I was always fascinated about this. There are animals who live on this earth that if you remove a limb, or if they lose a limb, it'll grow back completely normally. This is the Mexican salamander regrowing its leg. The Middle Eastern newt is another example of an animal that can completely regrow a limb. Now, our perception of ourselves is that we can't regenerate. And in fact, when I was in medical school in the 80s, we were taught that humans have no regenerative capability. That's why a human being cannot regrow a limb, or for that matter, a heart or a brain or any organ that's injured. There were exceptions to that. We know we can regrow skin if it's injured. We know that the liver can regrow. And that goes back to a story actually in Greek mythology. The Greeks appreciated that the liver could regrow. But with the heart and the brain or limbs, not in humans. Why am I showing you a picture of a nuclear explosion? The fact that nuclear bombs were exploded in the atmosphere gave scientists a very valuable tool that allowed us to completely change our thinking about the heart and the brain. So when nuclear bombs are exploded, they release a variation of carbon into the atmosphere, carbon-14, and that can be used by scientists to date the cells in our body when a human being dies. And it was these types of experiments that showed, and this is a classic paper from Spalding et al., published just 5 years ago. We talked about 5 years being changing the world, that showed that the hippocampus, which is linked to the amygdala, which we heard about before, had, when people died, typically about 33% of the cells in the hippocampus were new. They had been developed in those people's brains after they had been born. And so this really shook things up. This means that key organs like the brain, and this is also true for the heart, do grow new cells after we're born, and they do so in adulthood. And it's estimated from this study that we grow 700 new cells in the hippocampus every single day. And I think this is very importantly linked to sleep. I believe that the new neurons are growing more preferentially when we are sleeping than when we're awake. And so perhaps this is yet another reason why a sleep deprivation is so important. It might delay this. Here are a couple of the key papers. The first paper that reported new cells in the hippocampus was actually published in 1998, but the critical one that actually measured the number of neurons was published in 2013. So what does this mean for disease? Well, it means that we have to rethink all of the diseases, the chronic diseases of adulthood. They're not just diseases of degeneration or loss of cells. There's actually a balance between new cells growing and new cells being lost. And perhaps if we can reshift that balance, we can heal diseases like Alzheimer's disease. The picture in the corner is of my colleague, Barry Baumel, who runs the Alzheimer's Center at the University of Miami. And he and I worked together to develop a stem cell trial for Alzheimer's disease, which we'll hear a lot about this afternoon. I won't go through it in detail. But we tend to think that Alzheimer's is due to the deposition of abnormal proteins in the brain, which therefore causes the brain to lose these cells that are so critical to cognition. And currently there's no available cure. There have been decades of work, hundreds of millions of dollars spent with very little success, although there was a success just mentioned last week by the company Biogen. But over, by and large, 20 years of huge amount of research, no success. Now, this is a picture, this is a cartoon picture of what the brain looks like in a patient with Alzheimer's, and you can see it's completely shrunken, and very importantly, the hippocampus, which is this area that's enriched for growing new neurons, is also shrunken. And we think it's because of this deposition of these amyloid proteins and these tau proteins that damage the neurons and cause it to shrink away. There's something we've missed in Alzheimer's disease that's also very important in mood disorders, and that is the role of inflammation in the brain. This picture is my colleague Charles Nemiroff, who's the head of psychiatry at the University of Miami, and he and I have had many discussions how stress leads to inflammation in the brain and how this can contribute to mood disorders. And this has been a guiding principle in our work with stem cells, which I'll come to next. So the general idea is that perhaps what we've missed with Alzheimer's disease is addressing the neuroinflammation, which could also be important in mood disorders. And what we've come to learn in our studies is that inflammation prevents the growth of new cells in the body under conditions of injury. So inflammation leads to reduced tissue regeneration, which contributes, our hypothesis is that it contributes to degenerative brain diseases, mood disorders, aging, and other degenerative diseases. So can we do anything about this? And this is absolutely critical and is a driving influence in the work that we've done with stem cells. So what are stem cells and how can they help the body heal itself? This beautiful picture of stem cells was taken by a postdoctoral fellow in my laboratory, Christina Sanina, who's now doing her medicine residency in New York. And this shows the stem cells in green and heart muscle cells, showing how these stem cells, if you culture them together, will bind together, and the stem cells will transmit factors into the muscle cells and cause their health to be improved. And through this research, we've understood that there are 4 things that stem cells can do. At least 4, there are others. They can reduce inflammation, very critical to what I said before about brain diseases. They can reduce scar tissue. They can stimulate new blood vessel growth. And very, very importantly, our research shows, the research of our lab and many others, is that they stimulate new tissue to form from precursor cells and from cell division. So we think that we can use mesenchymal stem cells to stimulate that body regeneration that we have innately. I showed you the data that shows that there are 700 new cells formed in the hippocampus per day, and we can use mesenchymal stem cells to increase that number. Mesenchymal stem cells should be thought of as a drug, a biological drug, a new generation of biological drugs, and they can be manufactured in the laboratory. You all hear a lot about clinics throughout the world and even in the United States that are giving you stem cell therapy. I urge you, if you speak or interact with any of these clinics, ask them to tell you exactly what it is they are claiming as a stem cell. Because a stem cell is defined by 2 things. 1, it can grow and divide, and 2, it can turn into another tissue. And so we use that property of growth and division to manufacture the cells from normal human healthy donors, as shown here. We take their bone marrow, we culture it in a special system, and then we package it and we quality control it. We make sure it is what we think it is, and this is very important for the FDA. The FDA demands that if you're going to give a patient a stem cell drug under an IND, that you be able to measure exactly what it is, and we do that as shown in that panel on the bottom left. We measure the cell surface receptors, and then we're able to give that back to a patient as a drug. Now, the first thing I've told you is that mesenchymal stem cells reduce inflammation, and we've published that in a number of studies. This is a study measuring a marker of inflammation called tumor necrosis factor. This study was done by Samuel Gopanian, another postdoctoral fellow in the laboratory. And these are older individuals who have very moderately elevated levels of tumor necrosis factor. And you can see in a dose-response fashion how we can suppress that TNF-alpha by 80% and keep it suppressed. And this is very important. This is the property that we believe is important for using mesenchymal stem cell infusions for Alzheimer's disease and depression. Now also, there is some role for stem cells to be introduced into the body to actually participate in growing new tissue. And this works a lot better in animals than it does in humans, as is typically the case. This is a very famous study done in mice, where an investigator labeled the stem cells in green, injected it into the mouse brain, and you can see in the hippocampus the growth of new neurons, that beautiful green structure. That cell originated from the stem cell. So there is some role for stem cells replacing tissue in addition to causing regeneration of tissue. So we have ongoing clinical trials right now, and these are done under INDs, as Sharon mentioned. So these are done in the United States with authorization of the Food and Drug Administration. And I want to tell you about 2 trials in particular, and if anybody's interested in these trials, wants to refer somebody to these trials, please don't hesitate to contact me. The one we're very excited about is the first in the United States, a trial which is a phase 1 trial sponsored by Longeveron and with support from the Alzheimer's Association to treat patients with early-stage Alzheimer's disease with mesenchymal stem cells. And another is being conducted at the University of Miami with Charlie Nemiroff, supported by the National Institute for Drug Abuse, is to look at patients with treatment-resistant depression, and we think we can help those patients as well by offsetting their neuroinflammation. We even think that mesenchymal stem cells can be useful in treating aging and aging-related conditions like frailty, which is a very, very big problem worldwide as the population ages. And again, we are taking advantage of anti-inflammatory effects, the fact that these cells can home to sites of inflammation, and then again, the pro-regenerative effects, the fact that the cells can stimulate endogenous tissues to repair. We all know that aging is associated with sarcopenia, where we lose muscle mass, and our hypothesis is that the stem cells I've described to you, can offset that. So in aging populations, we are studying the fact that the stem cell infusions might be able to improve sarcopenia, boost cognitive function, improve cardiovascular function, and even boost the immune system to offset aging-related deterioration and functional capacity. I told you I'm a cardiologist. I must end by at least giving you one word about the heart. The pictures on the left show what the heart looks like, the damaged area of the heart after a heart attack. This scar tissue, if I can get the pointer to work. Right there, that's the area of damage to the heart. And that's how much repair we can get with injections of stem cells. And again, what was so exciting to us, and this was really one of the first clues that allowed us to believe that mesenchymal stem cells stimulate that endogenous repair. This picture over here shows cells, cardiac myocytes, in cell division, and there's an actual cell undergoing what's called mitosis, dividing into 2, and this was upregulated, increased by about 20-fold in animals who had received injections of mesenchymal stem cells into the damaged area. So the field of using mesenchymal stem cells for heart disease is very far along, and there's a phase 3 trial being conducted now, which means that approval for this treatment for patients with heart failure is imminent. Congress actually got involved in the stem cell field in 2016, and part of a new law called the 21st Century Cures Act gave the FDA new powers to stimulate the, accelerate the approval of stem cell therapies. So, what have I told you today? Stem cells represent a brand new approach to treating degenerative diseases of the brain and the body, and this is very, very exciting to doctors and scientists now. What I didn't go into in great detail is that stem cells can be given from one donor to another person without requiring any immunosuppression. They reduce inflammation and they promote tissue regeneration in organs as diverse as the brain and the heart and many other organs. And this has provided us an opportunity to have a new treatment strategy, which we now have in clinical testing in about 15 or 16 different disease states. Neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration, aging, and other disorders are key areas in which there's very active research in the United States right now. I'm very fortunate to direct a very, very talented team of scientists and trainees at the University of Miami. This is the picture of the current team, the team roster. And we've been very, very fortunate to have magnificent funding from the NIH going back to 2005 with a number of these very important mechanisms. And finally, I should also acknowledge the Alzheimer's Association that's funding the phase 1 trial. Several foundations have also supported our work, the SOFA family, the STAR Foundation, and the Marcus Foundation. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Doran Pinnell. I'm on the Aspen Brain Institute board, and I'm also a member of the Duke Health Board of Visitors. All the speakers have been so great this morning, and this will be the last one before Gina gets up and has us sing and dance again. Not quite, okay. Jamie Wheel is Executive Director of the Flow Genome Project. He is co-author of the bestseller, Stealing Fire. He's an expert on peak performance and the application of flow states. Flow Genome Project is an international transdisciplinary organization dedicated to reverse engineering the genome of flow, or the peak performance state, by 2020. It's 2018 already, so let's see what Jamie has to tell us. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And first of all, hats off for your endurance. I personally have no more than like 2 or 3 talks in me at a time before my butt and my brain go a little stir crazy, so you guys are awesome. I have a quick request. So I woke up this morning at sunrise in the mountains north of Boulder and hot-footed it down here to be with you guys. Got to zoom over Independence Pass, which is a place I used to guide mountaineering and backcountry trips, so it was wonderful to be back in these mountains again. And after lunch, I turn around and zoom back to Boulder for a commitment tonight. So with that, those are my cards on the table. So I'd like to ask you guys to ante up too. So can we do 2 things? First of all, can we all just stand up, shake it out, and then let's reach into our pockets. Because there was such excessive calorie burn to be here in co-located 3D reality in real time with each other, please take out your phones. Yes, 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 go ahead. Come on, no sandbagging. I was watching the last couple of talks. Take out your phones, please go ahead and just power them down for 20 minutes. You can take a look at lunch. I promise the world will not have become even screwier in 20 minutes. Power them down, put them in your pockets, and let's be here together. All right, thank you so much. So what I'd love to do is, ideally, let's kind of do a refresher. Let's pop it up a level onto the balcony of all the topics we've been talking about during this event and many of the ones still to come. And the idea is, what is possible when we unlock the findings of neuroscience and neuropsychology, and we apply them to our personal lives and to our broader social, cultural, and political goals and challenges. So in a nutshell, this is the frame that I would set up, is that paradoxically, things in the world, material abundance, access to tools and technology, all of these things are at all-time highs. We live in an era of unparalleled abundance, and weirdly, paradoxically, we're unhappier than ever. We're suffering in larger, greater numbers than ever. What on earth is going on? And what I would like to advance and kind of float as a hypothesis for us to consider today is that part of the reason, not all, but part of the reason, is that we have been taking a purely and exclusively psychological approach to well-being, to happiness, to contentment, to engagement, to anxiety, to depression, to existential despair, to all of the human condition, and we've been taking it solely sort of behind the eyes and in our ego-based stories. When in reality, there are a lot more parts to our bodies and brains, and the way that our bodies and brains directly inform our hearts and minds. And if we can understand those connections better, we can have greater impact in 3 areas: healing, innovation, and connection. And those actually all cue off the neuroscience that we're going to talk about today. So are we good? We locked and loaded to jump into the story? Yeah. All right. So raise your hand if you read, heard of, came across, saw somebody else talking about this book within the last couple of years. Yeah, Hillbilly Elegy It was written by J.D. Vance. He's a very interesting fellow. He grew up in the backwoods Appalachia of rural Ohio. We've got the classic kind of overlooked town, opioid addictions, lots of dysfunctions. His ticket out was to join the Marine Corps. From the Marine Corps, he parlayed that into entry into Yale Law. And then he wrote this book. And he wrote that the timing of it was propitious. It was right around the last 24 months. So just as the world lurched off its axis in 2016, and a whole bunch of people said, what on earth is going on? Vance came out with this book, and he tried to explain what is happening and what is it like in the flyover states, in the overlooked and forgotten places in America. And this came out of Princeton a couple of years ago, which was basically saying that if you are a white male with less than a college degree over the age of 40, your incidences of mortality are skyrocketing. And interestingly, an even higher uptick for women in the same demographic, but still lower overall numbers. So that's shocking. For the first time in generations, children are having lower prospects. This is the sort of truncation or perversion of the American dream that parents strive and struggle. They pass the football to their kids. The kids take it another few yards downfield, and life keeps getting better. And we're actually witnessing a turning point. This is happening broadly around the world as well. The World Health Organization has done a study just in the last 2 years and has found that around the world, suicide and depression rates are skyrocketing. And they are happening, if you see those dark red areas on this map, they are happening in areas of low economic development, poor social and political stability, basically in the places where, you take a look at this, 75% of suicides are taking place in low and middle income countries. And just take a look at that bottom right-hand corner, that annually, more of us around the world choose to take our own lives at this point than war and all natural disasters combined. Just think about that for a moment. We are born into the 21st century with peace and prosperity. There's no saber-toothed tigers. There's no Attila the Huns. There's no black plagues, or at least not right now. Fingers crossed. And we have become our own worst enemies. More humans choose to step off the mortal coil every year than war, famine, flood, earthquake, forest fires combined. That's shocking. So this is the weird world we live in. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We have air conditioning. We have Chilean grapes in February at Whole Foods. And giant, amazing 4D. By the way, sidebar, are you guys a little bummed by high-resolution widescreen TV? Because they turn all your favorite movies into what looks like 80s VHS soap operas. Like, they've completely, like, the contrast is gone. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. So far, we could say, okay, there's a big global mental health epidemic. It's directly affecting the downtrodden, the overlooked, the people having the hardest time keeping up with the bus of this wild-ass, globally connected society. But this sign right here, right, you can read it. It's a railroad crossing sign. But it's actually affixed to a telephone pole in a town many of you know, Palo Alto. And in the last 10 years, there has been an epidemic in Palo Alto High School and other related high schools in the region of some of their best and brightest kids. So this is not Appalachia. This is not red state flyovers. These are the parents of PhDs. These are the dual income tech industry titans. And they've had to hire private security guards to guard the railroad tracks 24/7, so no more of Palo Alto's finest children don't choose to walk in front of those trains. So that really drives it home. This is not just social justice, right, although vital and necessary. This is not just global distribution of wealth and access. This is right here in the cradle of innovation with our best and brightest. So you might have heard a lot about diseases of despair. in this last few years. The idea that folks are just literally overwhelmed and suffering in greater numbers than ever. But what if we got it wrong? What if these aren't diseases at all? What if they're symptoms? What if all of these things we're seeing are symptoms of something even bigger and more pernicious? And what I would propose to you, and back to that big idea in the beginning where we kind of teed this up, is that we are potentially overloading our nervous systems. So if you look at this good old-fashioned 40s era radio, right? Anthropologists have a term for societies. They classify societies as monophasic or polyphasic societies. And that just means one channel or many channels to consciousness. What are accepted ways for people to have awareness, interact with information? So many indigenous cultures, for instance, would be polyphasic. They would have dreams, visions, trances, premonitions, meditation, shamanic states, a whole bunch of things, and they were integrated and valid. So if you came downstairs and said, in Chiapas, and you said, Abuela, Abuela, I just had a dream of grandfather. Abuela would not say, oh, that's just a Freudian projection of your unconscious, shut up and eat your Wheaties and get to the school bus. She'd say, oh, what did grandfather have to say? Right? Tibetan lamas who go into trance become the oracles. They bring through information that is considered valid and essential. Well, we, surprise, surprise, ended up with a monophasic culture. And that happened way back when, French Enlightenment, the idea of good old-fashioned straight-up empirical rationalism, and what I can touch, taste, see, feel, measure is real. And we ended up with a singular mode of consciousness, which is predominantly waking state, rational, binary consciousness. And it has very specific neurological correlates. You can track it, you can measure it. It gave us all sorts of awesome things. It gave us the scientific revolution. It gave us civil society. It gave us civil rights. It helped us articulate free markets. It did a wonder of things. But what it robbed us of is range and versatility in our neuropsychology. And what happened is that dial, which used to roll up and down the knob so freely for millions of years of human evolution and culture, got rusted shut. And so now we're in a situation where we are running good old AOL modem at the time where the world has just gone to quantum fiber optic. A couple of years ago, Eric Schmidt made the point, it's kind of mind-blowing. He said up until 2007, for all of human history, all of the bits of information that were ever shared are now getting duplicated every 2 years. So all of human history, including cavemen, to 2007, now every 24 months. If you read the New York Times Sunday edition tomorrow morning, in that one leisurely hour and a half or so, with a cup of coffee, you will have consumed more information than a medieval monk did in their lifetimes. So what we are looking at is literally a situation where we are all experiencing chronic micro-PTSD. We are getting stimulated and triggered, and we do not have the resources to integrate this in meaningful, healthy, sustainable ways. So last year, Stephen Kotler and I came out with this book, Stealing Fire, and it was an assessment of exactly this issue from the other side of the fence, because we thought, okay, that's the public health case, right? That's where we can know, hey, it's global, it's pernicious, it's pervasive, and obviously there's a strong need to go out and do something about this. We came at it from the exact opposite side. We're like, well, really, those are public health stats. NGOs, they tend to have a specific filter. If this is really real, really the kind of crisis we think it might be, it should show up in the marketplace as well. There should actually be an economic signature to this problem. So we actually began a 6-month research project with a team of economists to try and track what we call... Is it possible if I can get it? Can I get a backup up here? That would be great, thanks. So we tracked the altered states economy, which was basically all the time and money that we collectively spend just trying to change that rusted knob on the dial, just trying to go from monophasic, I'm stuck in my head and I cannot get out and it's killing me, into polyphasic. And we considered the categories that would make sense. Any pursuit or behavior that literally provides a shift in consciousness from waking state 21st century normal, tired, wired, stressed, probably a little neurotic, into something where I step outside myself and I experience some degree of relief. We looked at the usual suspects, drugs and pharmaceuticals, both licit and illicit. We looked at media, social media, streaming pornography, IMAX theaters, anything that with the primary reason for doing it is to lose myself, even if for a moment. We looked at personal growth ranging from formalized therapy to the entire multi-billion-dollar self-help industry. And we looked at recreation, where you're not playing for points, you're not playing for trophies, you're playing for the delight and loss. Well, we tallied it all up, and we ended up with a number that was mind-boggling. In fact, it was so ridiculous, I made our economists recalculate it 4 different times before we went to press, because it's $4 trillion. That's a quarter of the US GDP. $4 trillion. A 15-year dual-front war in Afghanistan and Iraq, to put this in perspective, the entire tab for that sucker is $5 trillion. We're spending $4 trillion every year just to get out of our heads. Now, not all of it's productive. A lot of it's distractive, addictive, destructive. But the fact that we spend that much consistently can underscore how essential a need this is. Because what we found in our studies, and we were trying to kind of create a model that's useful, like what are those non-ordinary states? What do people value when they try and change that channel? Where are they trying to get to? And what we found was there's 4 consistent features: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. And they show up across meditation, across flow states, across psychedelic states, across sexual states, across movement and dance, across action sports, across a whole host of doorways in. The places people can continually get to represent these 4 things. Selflessness just means that inner critic in my head has finally gone quiet. And whether I'm doing CrossFit or I'm an endurance runner or whatever, like just the ability to not have that nag. The timelessness means I'm no longer running away from painful past or running towards fearful futures. I'm not on my phone and my planner. I'm just here, as Eckhart Tolle famously said, right? And Ram Dass before him. But to be in this present moment, priceless. The effortlessness is endless motivation, joy and delight for doing the thing we're here to do. And the richness is actually access to information, pattern recognition, and decision making I don't normally have. So that's the why behind the $4 trillion. Now, as we were doing this research, we tracked all the data. What's happening in neuroscience, what's happening in psychology, what's happening in occupational therapy, rehabilitative stuff, and we found ourselves accidentally creating a Rosetta Stone. If you guys remember the original Rosetta Stone, it was like the time of Napoleon. They went to Egypt. They were trying to figure out what all the hieroglyphics were, and they found this one stone, and it was written in Greek, Demotic Greek, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. And because they had all 3, they could figure out exactly what the sentences meant, and they unlocked, thousands of years of Egyptian communication. Well, in some small way, we found a bit of a Rosetta Stone for optimal human flourishing and well-being. Now, for the technicians in the audience, I want to caution you guys, this is a 2-dimensional approximation of multivariable complex human stuff. So these relationships are not one-to-one, they're not locked, but this is just a general gestalt to take a look at, which is, in a nutshell, 21st century wired, what we talked about, tired, wired, stressed. That's the left-hand side with the red circle. That's what you're looking at. You're looking at a lot of cortisol, a lot of norepinephrine, a lot of high beta wave activity, a lot of prefrontal cortical activity. Quite often, for many of us, especially desk-bound and sitting and all these things, we have crummy posture. Our shoulders roll forward. Our lungs collapse. The bottom third of our lungs are usually pooled CO2. We have poor air exchange and poor oxygen saturation. Our cardiac rhythm, right, is typically erratic with very poor cardiac coherence. There's this predictable stack, and this is where most of us live most of the time. But if you look on the right-hand side with the yellow circle, that's where things tend to get consistently interesting. And again, remember, the dial is not that we're not trying to change one fixed location on the dial for a different fixed location on the dial. We're looking for range. And by gaining access to different neuroelectrical states, alpha and theta. Many of you are aware of those from meditative practices. Again, flow states correlate in these zones. Deactivating our prefrontal cortex tends to give us relief and tends to give us access to other areas of our brain connecting, communicating, and making sense for us. All of these things build out to and lead up to basically paint by numbers consciousness design, which is kind of radical when you think about it, and really exciting as far as the possibilities and the premises it gives us access to. So when you throw that in gear, this is a version of what this looks like, and this is based on Herbert Benson's work at Harvard, and then built on with some of our research with Red Bull and a lot of their elite athletes. But when you take a look at this, if you take it, in fact, I don't think this pointer, I don't think I have a pointery thing, but if you look at the section that says struggle, that's where this cycle starts. Meaning like life, any experience starts with overload, starts with more challenge than we can handle. That's where we are in 21st century normal. High beta activity, stress response, potential vigilance, and we're trying to deal with something we haven't solved for. Now, either we get super stressed there and we collapse, or if we're really fortunate, we end up in a release phase. And that's where nitric oxide, neurotransmitter, flushes through our system. It flushes out and down regulates our stress response, and it helps communicate and bring in a lot of relaxation and well-being neurochemicals. Our brain waves tend to slow down a notch. We start becoming less forcing the feel and more sort of feeling the force. We're allowing ourselves to kind of go with something. That could be frustration, it could be fatigue, it could be a whole host of things, but that's what it does. Then we actually end up in a flow state or a non-ordinary state. And that's a situation where our brain waves go from alpha, potentially even all the way down into theta. Most of us only experience theta when we're in sort of drifting off to sleep. It's called a hypnagogic state, right? Where you kind of jerk awake and you suddenly find yourself having a weird dream even though you thought you were still awake. But that's a place of amplified pattern recognition, super enhanced connections, and very interesting access to novel ideas. And that's where you also get feel-good hormones, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide. And you end up in a very resourced state. And then finally, you end up in a recovery stage. And that recovery stage is hinged on what we were just talking about this morning, deep delta wave sleep. And then we can begin this all again. Now think about it. What we've learned is that people who are in trauma can go through this cycle and they can come back to zero, they can come back to homeostasis in their nervous systems. And that if you give humans, I mean, I am a terrible offender at this. I leave my laptop open for a week at a time, and I end up with 30 tabs across my browser, and then at some point I'm trying to like get on a Skype or a Zoom and my video won't work, and I'm like, what's going on? It's like, oh, I've had way too many tabs open for too long on my computer. What do we do? Right? You hit the power button, right? You shut it down and you boot it back up. And most of the time that helps. And that's what we're finding is an incredible antidote to this information overwhelm, to the idea that we're trying to perceive a world that's in broadband, just running little modems. And the interesting thing, the thing that I think potentially connects us all here today, why we're in this room, why this event exists, is that we are in the last decade, and you could say the last 5 years, but certainly recently and increasingly, we are experiencing ways to unlock this knowledge because of the intersection of these four forces. And these four forces, psychology, technology, pharmacology, and neurobiology, advancements in each of these fields are now overlapping. We're getting insights into how to address the human condition by how these things cross-pollinate. So for an example, is Imperial College, who we're actually doing a partnership with, doing research. We're actually comparing the neurophysiology of a flow state to their MDMA and trauma work. Because they were able to put substances like MDMA and psilocybin into a participant and then put them in an fMRI machine, they weren't just learning more about the substance, they were learning more about the nature of mind because they could end up with highly accurate readouts and data and imaging. That's a fascinating thing. That's where we're having an understanding of human psychology because we have better access to neurobiology and pharmacology. Alternately, there's technoceuticals like electrical impulses to tune people's vagal nerves, which can decrease stress, inflammation, a whole host of things. And that's actually a little magnetic, almost like a little magnetic pacemaker meets garage door opener that people are putting here. And suddenly technology is intersecting with neurobiology and completely changing our psychology. So with that, the doors are open. We have the Rosetta Stone. And what it's allowing us to do is realize that we don't have to face this human condition without tools. And that the next breakthrough technique, technology, pill, practice actually lives within an even bigger map, that Rosetta Stone. The idea that we can heal ourselves and each other, that we can access innovation and we can enhance collaboration by tuning the knobs and levers of our bodies and brains is potentially what I hope is our best shot at the future. And I'll leave you with this one, which is both Wes Jackson, who's fantastic, and his quote, I think, speaks for itself here. But there's another one from the Talmud, which says, "We are not expected to finish this work, nor are we excused from it." Thank you very much.
Wow, that's pretty exciting. I have just one more little bit, one tiny 3-minute video that's going to tell you about our Aspen Brain Institute's third program. It's called the Global STEM Alliance. It really, I think we're going to try to help train some global students to be the people that can think like Jamie Wheel thinks, some of the leaders and inventors of the future. So may I please show you this and just tell you 2 minutes about it, and then we're gonna have some shaking and dancing and then lunch. So guys, can you play that Global STEM Alliance video? Thank you. This was made by a young high school student.
The STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These disciplines have historically stood at the forefront of scientific and technical innovation. But access to these subjects and the resources they demand are still the reserve of those who can afford it. As the philanthropist Dr. Kelly Gerstenhaber has said, the most underserved student is the STEM-talented, financially disadvantaged child, and the cost of this negligence is immeasurable. Together, we can change this. The Aspen Brain Institute is proud to announce its support of the New York Academy of Sciences Global STEM Alliance, created to inspire and prepare the next generation of STEM innovators.
I really had no idea what being a scientist would be like. I knew about the scientific method before, but now I understand how it would be applied.
The Global STEM Alliance brings together 8,000 students from over 50 countries. With the goal of supporting economically disadvantaged students, the initiative provides leadership and community-oriented training from a global network of talented peers. Once accepted, participants become young members of the New York Academy of Sciences.
It's not every day that I can meet someone from England or from China, so I was thinking, why not be social and put myself out there?
These young people are the innovators and future leaders in brain science and STEM studies. But the program was forced to deny many of the brilliant applicants a chance.
It doesn't matter what degree you get. What matters is that skill that you're learning and how you're going to apply it to the question I like to ask, which is, what problem do you want to solve?
Let's inspire, support, and empower our future innovators. By donating to the Aspen Brain Institute, you can help expand a student's scientific horizons by leaps and bounds. The Aspen Brain Institute will match any donation over $1,000. The more you donate, the more STEM-talented kids you sponsor, and the more your impact multiplies. To help us reach our goal of supporting 2,000 brilliant STEM students, simply head over to AspenBrainInstitute.org. Thank you, and we hope you can donate today.
Sorry to be making a pitch, but this Global STEM Alliance, which is a global peer online network for low-income STEM talented kids all over the world. There are 8,000 kids already on this Global STEM Alliance. We partnered with the New York Academy of Sciences, who has the infrastructure and really runs this group. But we're allowed to identify 2,000 kids in this year and in the future that we can give the opportunity to join the Global STEM Alliance, where they get extra STEM training. They will become our 21st century global leaders. The Aspen Brain Institute itself gives a social impact action prize. I just want to tell you 2 words about that because you'll hear the type of kids that belong to this and take advantage of this program. Last year, 4 girls won our social impact prize. I don't know how they really do it, but they meet online on a global platform. 2 girls from India, 1 girl from New York, 1 girl from California. They had never met each other. They meet online. They're very STEM talented. They decided they wanted to work on a challenge on how to find Ebola symptoms that recur in Ebola survivors, but the Ebola survivors don't know it. So they developed a wrist tracker and an eye tracker to alert Ebola survivors about these symptoms. That was last year. This year, we had 2 prizes. One group of kids from all over the world joined, 4 kids, and they figured out a way to reconfigure the molecules in plastic so that it would be more biodegradable. And if that ever gets to market, that will be revolutionary. So there are things like that that these kids can do, and I just wish that you could join us and help us identify. There are 2 things you could do to help. One is to help us identify kids that need this, low-income STEM talented kids that we can give the opportunity to join this Global STEM Alliance. If you know of schools that have these kids, you know personally some kids, you have contacts in other countries, please let us know through the Aspen Institute or through me personally. I am passionate about supporting this program. I want these 2,000 kids to be my personal legacy. This is where I want to make a difference. Our board has decided to support this, and if any of you want to support this, you can be a hero and change someone's life, and I'm just simply asking you to pay some of the opportunities that you've had to pay it forward. Thank you. Oh, we have an offer from someone, Vlad, who's helping us, Vlad Inash, and the Aspen Promise Foundation. They'll match the first 10 donations over $5,000. And they will also give a laptop for the Global STEM Alliance student with your donor's name on it. So we'll sort of be coming around and asking if any of you want to do any of this identification thing or donation thing. We're going to have Gina come up and do some fun stuff. I just have to tell you, after 3 minutes of Gina with some fun, we are going to have lunch, and there'll be a networking lunch, so there'll be the names at tables of all our outstanding speakers. You can sit at any table you want, but it will be first come, first serve. So let's call up Gina Murdoch, the founder of Aspen Yoga Society, Lead with Love, and many of her outstanding programs.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I wanted to see, is there any of the STEM kids here today? I would love for you guys to come up here. I mean, if you're brave enough, come on up. I want to share with you all something very important. And just like Jamie said, I know it's lunchtime, but I would just ask for your attention. I want you to just sit with me for just a moment. You should stay. My team and I, Nicole and Abby, who are here, we run an organization called Lead with Love. Our organization is heart-centered social impact, and our mission is to shift culture from fear to love. We do that through events, trainings, things like retreats. We were in Bali earlier this year with Michael Franti. We have an event in October that's called a Leadership Summit, and I would love for you all to tune into that. But what I'm most passionate about, just like Glenda with the STEM kids, is our service component. It's called Project Wellbeing, and Nicole runs this program, if you'll come back up here. I wanted to show you a few pictures of people here in our community in Aspen. We have road and bridge workers. We have people in the clerks and recorders, parks and recreation. We go into the workplace and serve the essential service workers of our community. We have a suicide rate in the Aspen area and Pitkin County that is 3 times the national average. So I want you to think about that just for a second. We are a very powerful community. We have a lot of money in this community. It doesn't matter. What happens here is people are suffering around the world. And what you heard from Jamie is every 40 seconds, someone in this earth chooses to take their life. So I just want us to take a deep breath and feel into that reality. Put your hand on your heart and know how precious this life is, how dear it is to all of us, and know that there are so many people suffering out there. So what we do with Lead with Love is that we try to inspire people, empower people to lead from their hearts. We are becoming so disconnected. We know each other, but we don't see each other anymore. And I think that that's a problem, and that's why we started this organization. So I want to thank Glenda, the Brain Institute, this STEM situation. I personally am supporting that as a board member, and I'm so honored to do so. Thank you for that. And so we're going to do something really fun, because life is about joy and fun. It's also about a lot of suffering. We know that. It's the juxtaposition, the dark and the light. And I do want to recognize my teacher, Rod Stryker, who's here, who is an amazing yoga teacher. And I think that he will be, in some ways, mortified that I am teaching laughing and shaking and dancing meditation. But I don't think so. I'd like to call you up on stage too, Rod Stryker. So life is about joy, it's about fun, it's about knowing our hearts and serving from our hearts. So I would like to ask you all to stand up. And we're going to do something called laughter yoga, laughter meditation. You guys are going to help us. And so we're going to start by clapping our hands like this. And then we're going to say ha, ha, ho, ho. Ha, ha, ho, ho. Ha, ha, ho, ho. Ha, ha. Just getting you warmed up. And by the way, this reduces stress and inflammation, everybody. We're going to take a partner. Just come here, Glenda. We're going to do what we call the lion's breath into each other's faces. It looks like this. You got to do it. You got to find someone and look right in their face. Big inhale breath. Come on, Mark Hyman. I'd like to invite Mark Hyman up to the stage, please. All the speakers, come on up here. We're going to bring all the speakers up here. And now I want you to take a deep breath in. You're going to clap your hand, and you're going to just start laughing hysterically. You got to fake it till you make it. Inhale. All right. Now you're going to take your body, you're going to start shaking it. Shake it just a little bit. Shake your legs, shake your arms. There you go, Tara Sheehan. Bring yourself up on stage, Seth, right now. And we're going to cue some music, you guys, and we're just going to have a really, really good time, okay? So dance with us. If you're a speaker, come up on stage. It'd be great if you played the music. That would be awesome. And we're going to shake it, and we're just going to have a really good time at BrainLab. Okay, everybody, shake it. Shake it. Louder, please. See if you can boost up the audio here. applause. We're having fun. We can clap our hands. Let's clap. Woo!